Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, and we back. We got a World War III alert. But before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we need to look back into exactly the what did Putin do? What is this checkmate he done made in the Middle East by signing this alliance with Iran right before Trump come into office, signaling to Trump that if you attack Iran, it's absolutely World War III. Let's get into this information. So, family, Trump gonna have to be very careful playing games in the Middle East now.
The fact that the weakening and even total destruction of Iran has always been the main goal of the United States in the Middle East has not been a secret to anyone. And now, with the coming to power of Donald Trump, the Iran issue has reached a new level. As you may remember, a few days ago,
the war's finna happen, and what you see happening in Ukraine, they finna flip it. And Israel and the United States, along with their NATO allies, they finna try to attack Iran and weaken Iran, and Russia gonna do to them exactly what they did to him in Ukraine. They're gonna back Iran, and they're gonna try to have a long drawn out war and see who gets defeated first.
During his interview with American journalists, the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, bluntly stated that the chances of starting a war with Iran are very high. In particular, commenting on the possible outbreak of war between the United States and Iran, Donald Trump did not hesitate to say that anything is possible, and that such a scenario could not be ruled out. Moreover, Trump administration officials admitted that Donald Trump will adhere to the previous tough policy towards Tehran after returning to the White House. At the same time, they did not rule out that Donald Trump could soon order preventive airstrikes against the facilities of the Iranian nuclear program.
Yep, big mistake.
Let me remind you that unlike Joe Biden, who offered Iran the lifting of heavy economic sanctions in exchange for abandoning its nuclear program, Donald Trump has never supported concluding any deals with Tehran, and offered to solve the problem with the
Revolutionary salute to our brother James White for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. I absolutely appreciate that love, family. Salute to you.
Iranian nuclear program exclusively by force. The severe rhetoric employed by President Trump regarding Iran stems from the influence of right-wing Zionists, who continue to furnish information and financial assistance to him. In simple terms, the coming 4 years will pose a significant challenge for Iran. During this time, the United States and Israel will do everything possible to weaken Iran as much as possible, and inflict fatal damage on this country. In this regard, Iran had only one option for survival: a close rapprochement with Russia. And judging by how events are developing, Vladimir Putin has made every effort to draw maximum benefit from the current situation in the geopolitical scene.
Revolutionary salute to my brother B.I.G., the big intelligent gentleman, for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. I appreciate that love, family. Salute to you, and salute to your commanders right now. I see they getting it on.
So, on January 17, 2025, a truly historic event occurred, which experts have already called Moscow's geopolitical breakthrough. The fact is that a few hours ago, in Moscow, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Russian leader Vladimir Putin signed an agreement on a comprehensive strategic partnership between Russia and
They're not even
Iran.
talking about this. They're not
My
even
dear-
talking about this in America. You see what I'm saying? See, they distracting us by starting that fire and all playoff games. His distraction in America. That World War III is at hand. Putin sitting there smiling. He's signing the World War III papers right now. Yeah, because Trump is going to have to try to fight Iran. He's going to have to try to do that. That's what the whole peace agreement in Palestine is for. They want to get to the big dog. There's only one country left on that list of 7 they had. Remember that list? They knocked off everybody. Only one country left. And Putin is sitting there smiling. He wants them to try. That's why he signed these papers, so Iran won't fold. Because if Iran fold and get toppled, that would devastate Russia and China. They know they cannot let Iran get toppled, or that'll be the end of their economic and military plans in the Middle East. And that we're gonna go. That's gonna reverberate throughout Africa and throughout South America. I promise you that. Iran, they got to let Iran stand tall, and then everything can proceed in this realigning of powers.
Dear truth seekers, this means that Vladimir Putin has created a powerful military-economic alliance between Iran and Russia in the Middle East, providing for developing trade and economic relations, resources, security systems, high technologies, and military cooperation. All this has greatly enhanced the military and economic potential of the two countries. The fact is that thanks to this agreement, Iran received the economic support and military protection of the Russian Federation. In addition, Russia will transfer to Tehran the modern technologies necessary for developing the Iranian air fleet and nuclear program. In return, Russia gained access to Iran's economic and military potential, and a land corridor to the Indian Ocean. Thus, Vladimir Putin managed to realize the main dream of all Russian emperors: to gain access to the Indian Ocean and the warm seas in the Eastern Hemisphere.
No other Russian leader ever had this type of power. I'm trying to tell y'all, man, we live in historical times. No other Russian leader has ever had this type of power. Don't tell me about none of them. We live in a time of Putin the Great.
This agreement between Russia and Iran is so beneficial to the two countries that even pro-government Western experts have recognized it as a real victory for Vladimir Putin. It is important to note that the Russian leader has been pushing for this agreement for decades. However, the globalists in Washington and London have done everything in their power to prevent that from happening. For this, they even eliminated the conservative Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi. And it was only thanks to Vladimir Putin's political will, wisdom, and patience that Russia finally managed to achieve its goal. It is important to note that Iran and Russia signed this agreement on the eve of Donald Trump's inauguration. Moreover, this happened against the background of an agreement reached between Israel and Hamas on a truce after a year and a half of hostilities. The fact that Israel has made a deal with Hamas indicates that Tel Aviv has not achieved its goal and failed to destroy this organization. This fact has already been called the defeat of Israel. After a year and a half of fighting, Israel is faced with a dubious result for itself. The Israeli army has almost completely obliterated the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth, killing tens of thousands of civilians. And yet Israel has not been able to achieve the destruction of Hamas. At the same time, the genocide of the Palestinian people and tens of thousands of corpses of women and children dealt a crushing blow to Israel's prestige in the international arena. According to even American military experts, the truce reached with Hamas is Israel's recognition of its own defeat.
Israel has not been defeated.
And against this backdrop, Vladimir Putin has radically changed the balance of power in the Middle East, thanks to the Iranian-Russian strategic treaty. Yes, Israel itself is not an enemy of Russia, but Tel Aviv is an ally of the United States. In this regard, Putin has created a new strategic alignment of forces in the Middle East, taking under military and economic protection the enemy of the United States and Israel. This is indeed Putin's brilliant maneuver, which disrupted the West's plans to form and strengthen the so-called Anglo-Saxon microregion. In this regard, sources in the Russian FSB confirmed that in 2022 and 2023, the British Special Services seriously considered the possibility of solving the existing geopolitical problems by physical liquidation of Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, they was gonna die too.
But why does England need it? It is clear that Russia and England are rivals and competitors. It is clear that relations between these two countries have always been not the best.
No, they're not.
However,
They're not rivals.
behind this lies something
They're not
more than the
rivals. They're not competitors. The UK is not on Russia level. The days of the sun have never set on England, the English Empire. That's long gone. They just in their mind, they think they still an empire, but they living up under the United States shadow, man. That's the fucking truth. But they deadly. Those bastards in power in the United Kingdom is very deadly.
rivalry between Moscow and London. My friends, I noticed that in recent times Russian diplomats in their statements began to mention the word Anglo-Saxons, almost as a synonym for the phrase collective West. For example, the Russian Foreign Ministry writes on its official website, NATO, led by the Anglo-Saxons, is escalating tensions around Ukraine. Who are the Anglo-Saxons? These are the ancient Germanic tribes who moved to Britain in the 5th century, and later became the core of English civilization. As you know, Britain is a little island that was great with its colonial possessions around the world, and for a long time proudly bore the status of the empire. Through its conquests, Britain was able to widely spread its influence, culture, traditions, and worldview to all continents. In fact, all Western civilization is based on the English cultural code, from Western Europe to the shores of North America and Australia. And this civilization, for hundreds of years, has become accustomed to dominating the planet. But now the situation is changing radically. The countries of the central, southern, and eastern parts of the Eurasian continent are rapidly developing. Today, the largest centers of industry are located in Asia, and the combined economy of Asian countries surpasses the Western one in many ways. China is stepping on America's heels, and according to experts, in the future will become dominant in the world. Russia, located between Asia and Europe, has also changed its vector in foreign policy. Russia's relations with China are at an all-time high level of mutual trust, which cannot be said about Western countries. In recent weeks, we have seen Vladimir Putin's increased activity in the international arena. Since the beginning of December, he managed to hold talks with several heads of state. Among all these negotiations, it is worth highlighting frequent contacts with the Chinese, Indian, and Iranian leaders. What is the real purpose of these negotiations? In my opinion, Putin's desire to create a strong geopolitical partnership on the Eurasian continent is behind these negotiations. In order to help you to understand what we are talking about, I will highlight on the world map those countries of the Eurasian continent with whose leaders Putin is.
Man, look how big Russia is, man. People don't play with Russia, bro. Look how big Russia is. That's why they hating, bro. That's why they want Russia. Hitler wanted Russia. Napoleon wanted Russia. You know, the small half, they want Russia. But look how big Russia is, man. These people better stop playing with Putin, man. They ain't taking a parking lot from Russia without it being a problem.
Is establishing close cooperation, and you can also see neighboring friendly states on this map. This is almost 4 billion of the world's population, 74% of the entire population of the continent. This is more than 41 million square kilometers of territory. 5 countries with the status of nuclear power. 3 countries developing the space industry. 4 world's religion centers: Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. Access to all seas and oceans. Control over the world's most important trade routes. Access to any kind of resources and minerals. It is worth adding that several key countries in the region are united by another important factor: conflict relations with the collective West. China opposes the United States on all fronts. Iran, which the West declared a rogue state, has been under sanctions and embargoes for many years. India still cannot forget the grievances of the colonial British past.
They can't trust India.
Small, but very nuclear North Korea is ready to start a war with the United States at any moment. If all these countries stand united against the West, it will not have a single chance to maintain its dominant position in the world. The Military, Political and Trade Association of Asian Countries is what Western politicians are most afraid of. It will mean the end of the dominion of Western civilization built on the Anglo-Saxon basis. This is also the reason for the extremely aggressive actions of England towards Russia and on its borders. The recent events in Kazakhstan are yet another confirmation of that. Many experts have stated that the British intelligence services were involved in organizing the unrest in Kazakhstan. And all because Kazakhstan is practically in the center of a promising Eurasian macro-union. Attempts to contain Russia in Eastern Europe and set fire to the key points of a promising macro-unification testify to the desire of Britain to delay the moment of the collapse of the Anglo-Saxon civilization, the desire by all possible means to prevent the aspiration of Asian countries to interact. That is why the West hates Putin so much. After all, he is trying with all his might to establish ties on the continent, establish good neighborly relations, and conclude mutually beneficial trade and military agreements. The West considers his activities in this direction as a threat to its own security, and therefore it would stop but nothing to prevent Putin.
Because he in the way. You see, Putin had been, if it wasn't for Vladimir Putin, they would have been knocked China off, North Korea off. The whole world would have belonged to them. Nobody would have been able to resist NATO. No country would have been able to resist NATO. But this dude done got in the way, and now they done wasted time. He done built up his revolutionary forces. His army is superior, and no army can defeat him. Now he's aligning everybody else, preparing everybody else for the battle that has to happen because they're not going to stop. So since they don't want a head-on confrontation with Russia because he'll put them to sleep, they're trying to pick off his allies, and he know what's coming. Iran know what's coming, so he's just getting them ready. They still together. You talk that shit, they don't want to play.
The fact that the West will continue to try to physically eliminate Vladimir Putin is not in doubt at all. Since 1999, this man has regularly disrupted all the West's plans. For 25 years, Vladimir Putin has not only revived Russia as a superpower, but also changed the whole world, showing the countries of the global South all the advantages of a multipolar world.
And for what he did with Africa, they'll never forgive him, bro. They'll never forget this man. He's been in the way of the whites ruling the world forever. They're gonna curse this man's name for generations. That the Anglo-Saxons, the Germanic tribes, the small hats, for what he has done. For what he done, allowed them Africans to rise up, gave them superior weaponry. Like I told y'all, now they can't stop Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. We're just gonna see what they're turning. Now Chad done rose up, a few other nations. Everybody kicking them Europeans out of Africa. They're not gonna forgive him for this, you know. But he don't give a damn. He don't want their forgiveness. They brought this on themselves. Yeah, man, it's time for him to go ahead and put an end to these bastards.
There is no doubt that Putin will go down in history as the man under whom the United States lost its hegemonic status and its unipolar system of government. The fact that on January 17, 2025, Vladimir Putin managed to sign such an important historical document with Iran, changing the entire balance of power in the Middle East, indicates that this man is indeed a political genius.
They didn't want to talk about it. They sitting there on TV talking about an Israeli peace plan because they want I want you to understand what's going on. So they can seem like they are the leaders. They bring peace. What? Please. What peace have y'all brought? No peace at all. It's a time for peace, a time for war. You know, Putin, no, we're only going to get peace through war. This is what they're supposed to be talking about, the Russia and Iran alliance paper that they just signed. Put it on paper that there will be no attack in Iran without hell to pay. without those jets getting shot out the sky. You just lost to the Taliban. How the fuck you gonna defeat somebody with air defense systems and modern tanks and things of that nature? Come on, man. They don't want to talk, but they don't want y'all to know this. Y'all not supposed to know. Y'all not supposed to be watching Cold Finger TV. Y'all not supposed to know why they over there talking shit on these other channels about attacking Iran. Iran is going to defeat the United States and Israel if they even try. I'm telling you right now. It's going to be real bad for them.
Perfectly understands all strategic priorities in foreign policy and uses the current situation for the benefit of the Russian Federation.
This the real news, not that bullshit they lying about on TV, acting like they gonna get some peace to the Palestinians. Yeah, nigga, they don't want y'all peace, nigga. This is how you got to get peace, through war. See, this is how these bastards do. Kill you, didn't say they're gonna give you some peace. Nah, that's all right. Gotta defeat you bastards. So then they want to terrorize us, say the terrorists is out there. Y'all be ready for the terrorism that might come on Super Bowl. These people is nuts, man.
Strategic partnership agreement that was signed by this guy and also by Putin. This is coming at a time when both Iran and Russia, they are actually the most sanctioned nation on earth. They are not struggling financially, by the way. Iran is feeling the heat, but not so much for Russia. Nevertheless, Russia can still feel the pain for Iran, and they decided it is time for us to cooperate strategically. Okay. Now, this is coming also when we have seen how BRICS nation, they got together and they now want to start or introduce their own currency to challenge dollar hegemony, US dollar. But something we will have to wait and find out. Somebody is not happy in Washington. This is the guy who is going to be the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. He said that the Islamic regime in Iran does not represent the great people of Iran. Iranians want peace, safety, and freedom for all. So as American people. American people, they are protesting every single day against the genocide in Gaza. None of the demands are being fulfilled. Instead, they were arrested, they were beaten up, they were chased away by the police. If you take a look at what is happening in Iran, on the other hand, you see people are actually coming out in support of the government in most cases. Take a listen to what Marco Rubio has to say.
2 points I want to make about Iran, and it's really important. When we talk about Iran, I'm talking about the radical Shia clerics and not the people. The people of Iran are people of an ancient civilization, an ancient culture with tremendous pride and advances. And I don't know who take great pride in their Persian heritage and identity. And I don't know of any nation on earth in which there is a bigger difference between the people and those who govern them than what exists in Iran.
Well, again, that's not true. The biggest example is the United States itself. It does not heed any of the demands from its people. They follow, they obey, they take orders from the Zionist lobby.
That's a fact that needs to be made repeatedly. In no way is the clerics who run that country representative of the people of that country and of its history and of contributions it's made to humanity. And it's a point I wish we would continue to make.
If you love
if
you love the people of Iran so much, what Marco Rubio is saying, Iranian great people, they have rich history of the civilization and blah blah blah, then why you sanction them? Why you sanction them? Why you sanction these people? Especially when he's blaming the government, but the government of Iran, they want to negotiate, they want to sign on that JCPOA anytime, but it was Donald Trump, it was the United States who threw it away. So these are all fuss, these are all crocodile tears for the Iranian people. They don't care about Iranian people. Now, Russia intelligence reportedly warned Iran. Take a look at some of the things they have done. Russia, they have reportedly warned Iran of Israel's attack hours in advance when the Zionist state of Israel attacked Iran on October the 16th. Now, this is something that also we have to focus on. their past relationship between Iran and Russia. So Russia is arming Iran in preparation for a possible war with Israel. This was published back in August last year. And we know that Russia, they provided Iran with S-400 missile defense system. In fact, Russian military personnel, they traveled to Iran to install those defense system in Iran. Now, Russia announced a support for Iran's retaliation attack on Israel. According to this new strategic agreement they will not allow anybody to use their territory or their airspace to attack the other country. If somebody wants to attack Iran, they cannot use Russian airspace, for example. And if they want to, or anybody wants to attack Russia, they cannot use Iranian airspace. If they do, then Iran and Russia both will shut down those missiles, those planes, fighter jets that are approaching to harm either of these two nations. There is one thing that we have to also understand at the same time, and that is that this agreement does not include military equipment transfer. Means Russian military will not be fighting for Iran. Iranian military will not be fighting for Russia. And Iranian military asset will not be used. Russian military asset will not be used. So personnel and asset, none of those things will be used. Yes, they can support each other for like defensive purposes. For example, if they come under attack, Iran can use Russian defense system. Russia can use Iranian Shahid drones, suicidal drones, but that's about it. They will not send their personnel or their military asset to fight a war for the other country. What is happening between Russia and North Korea is not what will happen between Russia and Iran. Iran will not send its troops to fight on behalf of Russia, according to this agreement. Now, this is coming from obviously Western analysts who believe that Russia is somehow using the North Korean troops to fight for them in Ukraine. So that is one thing about the agreement. And there are so many other aspects of it that we can discuss. Now, in the past, we have seen how Israel says Russia will help Iran deal with an expected Israeli attack. Shows that Iran and Russia, they were forming this kind of strategic relationship even before it was signed. Even before it was signed. There is no doubt about that. And Netanyahu, he realized it. He realized it. Israel calls Russia a sole supplier of weapons to Iran in Middle East. This is actually not a secret anymore. We know. The whole world knows it, and Russia doesn't care about it. If US wants to put more sanction on Russia for it, they don't care. Iran is continue to receive more military aid and help to defend itself from their enemies, from those adversaries, and Russia will do the same thing. Now, Iran, the response on Israel was the best way to punish the aggressor. So Iran's response to Israel, response on Israel was the best way to punish the aggressor. So again, they were forming this relationship long time ago. We had absolutely no idea about this, but a lot of people, a lot of analysts, they believe this is what was happening. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Russian President Vladimir Putin have signed a cooperation pact, deepening the partnership between two of the world's most heavily sanctioned nations. Iranian and Russian officials said the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty, quote unquote, covers areas from trade, military cooperation to science, culture, and education. So basically, they are going to be sharing everything. I mean, both of these countries have opened their doors for each other wide open, not just open, wide open on every aspect, military, culture. This is something that should terrify the West, because Russia pretty much is saying that the Western propaganda against Iran, where they claim, Piers Morgan, he mentioned it many, many times, that is Iran, the oppressed woman, with the hijab, the burqa and all that, Russia is now showing a middle figure to this Western narrative about Iran, literally, because Russia is now embracing that same culture. I mean, obviously, Russia is not going to tell its people, its women, to wear hijab, but Russia is okay, and they're welcoming it. So, for example, if an Iranian comes to Russia and they cover themselves from top to bottom, the women, Russia will never have a law that will prohibit those women. Unlike what we have seen in countries like Sweden, Denmark, where they ban hijab for good. You can never wear hijab. It's banned. In France, they ban hijab too in public places and government places. So Russia is really showing the middle finger to this Western culture and embracing Iranian culture and Islamic culture. At a joint news conference with Pezeshkian in Moscow on Friday, Putin praised the deal as a quote-unquote real breakthrough, creating conditions for stable and sustainable development of Russia, Iran, and the entire region. This is going to be a huge mutual interest agreement between these two countries. The Kremlin earlier said that the treaty will enhance the quote-unquote military, political, and trade economic relations between Tehran and Moscow, though the specifics remain undisclosed. It would also obviously include BRICS. Iran is getting a much stronger position in the BRICS, and Russia is welcoming it. Russia is absolutely happy about it. Pezeshkian said the two countries were entering a new chapter in relations, especially in trade. The leader said that the two countries would intensify cooperation across a range of areas, including politics, security, trade, transport, and energy. What else is left out? Nothing. Really nothing. I mean, if you go to Iran, you see a lot of Russians. Russia has a lot of tourists traveling to Turkey. And now these Russian tourists, will be traveling to Iran. And they bring in millions, if not billions of dollars in revenue every year for Turkey. So a huge chunk of it could go to Iran, potentially, because the door is open. I don't know if they will even need a visa anymore. Both countries have increased their trade activities in response to Western sanctions. Iran has already provided Russia with self-detonating Shahid drones, which Moscow has used in its nightly strikes on Ukraine, according to Ukrainian and Western officials. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 22, Moscow has viewed Iran as key strategic partner, a move that has alarmed Western officials who see both nations as destabilizing forces globally. It's actually the other way around. It's the Western countries that are destabilizing the entire world. They are going to be working together. I mean, Russia and Iran, they are going to be working together, and they mean it. It is not like, oh, just on the paper. They do. I mean, a lot of the time we see that when they sign agreements between leaders, it takes years for it to come to fruition. But in this case, they were already working. Russia and Iran, they were already doing commerce, trade, and partnering in everything. Because Iran knows waiting for the Western countries to lift sanction on them and to normalize ties with them is just a waste of time and oxygen. And Iran, thankfully, they are waking up to this reality and siding with Russia.
So we are now at the situation where Donald Trump is about to take foot in the White House. His inauguration is coming up in a couple of days. And before he has even started his presidential term, he has managed to somehow as he put it, and as even corporate media is saying, he contacted Benjamin Netanyahu, and apparently, according to Israel, they are saying that they were forced into a ceasefire deal. They are very vocal about the fact that they feel like they're not getting everything that they wanted. So a lot of us here in the U.S., those that still believed that Biden and Harris were doing the best that they could, are now being very vocal and are realizing that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris could have done this quite a while ago. And Donald Trump was able to just do it like this. And I want to hear your take about this. Why do you think this was able to happen? Why do you think that Donald Trump was able to put more pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, and why Joe Biden and Kamala Harris decided not to?
I think it was clear that Biden supported the genocide. And the only thing that probably worried his team was that it would impact his reelection. And when he was forced to step aside, Harris, I think, faced the same concern. And so she spoke from both sides of her mouth. In one state, she said one thing, and in another state, she said another. But I think it was very clear that the United States always had the ability to stop this genocide from the very beginning. And Biden's own proposal, ceasefire proposal, which is more or less what we have now, was, I think, given in May. And instead of blaming the Israelis in May and June for rejecting his proposal, he blamed Hamas and the resistance and their allies for rejecting the proposal, even though they accepted the deal. So the Palestinians and the resistance, they accepted the deal, the Israelis rejected it, and the United States was saying, no, the Israelis accept the deal, and the Palestinians are rejecting it. So it was clear that they were enabling Netanyahu to continue with the genocide, the Holocaust, and they were only trying to buy time. Just like at the beginning, when the claims were made about the beheadings and the rape allegations, which were all lies. I remember I was invited onto Piers Morgan's show, and he was telling me about the rapes and the beheadings, and I said, well, show me the footage, and he just ignored what I had to say, and I was like, show us the footage, show us the evidence. But even afterwards, I was told that on different shows he was saying the same thing, and so were others. They continued to make these claims because they were trying to help the Israeli regime continue what they were doing. So the same was true with Biden. The same was true with Harris. And I think Trump, I can't speak about his intentions. I know less about Trump than you do, and I would be very careful not to. Actually, over the past couple of months, I just said somewhere else that I've been invited to these think tanks in Iran and these places where they gather and like specialists talk about issues. And there have been I've been invited to a number of places to talk about Trump and the coming administration. And I refuse all of them. Others have gone, but I refuse because I said, I don't know. I have no idea what Trump is going to do in the next few months and what his plans are for the next few years. And anything that I say is sheer speculation. I don't know the intentions of Trump, but I do think that if he probably recognizes that this is not going well for the United States, just like Ukraine, that this has destroyed the image of the United States and the West in general, and that the Israeli regime, although he considers himself to be its best friend, the regime is single-handedly, it has destroyed the way in which people view rivals of the United States. The Western media has always had a strong hold over most of the world. And countries like Iran were always demonized. And when I would travel when I'd be invited to conferences, let's say in Latin America or in Africa or in Asia, non-Western countries, I would be people would be raising questions, which made it clear to me that they were either watching Western media or that they were reading Western journals, before everything went online and afterwards as well, or that they were reading Western textbooks. And I'd have to answer the same sort of questions that I'd be answering on Western media, or I'd be answering in Western conferences. But that has changed. Things are very different now. And I think the last 2-3 years, but especially the last 15 months, has made Iran very popular in parts of the world that that surprised me. That has made Hamas and Hezbollah and these names, household names and popular groups, whereas before people probably had no clue what was going on in Palestine. So many things have changed, and probably I don't know for sure, but probably Trump does recognize that the U.S. is paying a huge price. You cannot calculate the damage that has been done to the West. I mean, Ukraine, you can calculate the damage. You can say, well, I don't know, $300 billion were wasted, trillions of dollars were wasted because of sanctions, and there are ways to calculate this to a degree. But how can you calculate it when Sabrina's reputation is? How do you put that into numbers? If your image has been enhanced, how do you calculate that? And what Israel has done to the West is that it's just demolished the West's soft power completely. How do you calculate that?
It's really interesting too, because the Democratic Party and corporate media here in the West managed to convince quite a bit of people that Donald Trump would be worse on this particular issue. And also Donald Trump, I would say, convinced people of that too, because of the rhetoric that he had. One of the things that he said is, if those hostages aren't back before I get into office, there's going to be hell to pay. Hamas is going to have hell to pay. So there was that statement. There were the statements when he was campaigning where he said Kamala Harris is like a Palestinian, like all these things that he said. The statement of go in and, finish the job. And then when people see this response of Donald Trump saying to Netanyahu, like, you got to accept this ceasefire and we have to move forward, it's the complete opposite of what he was saying when he was campaigning. Some are saying that, well, maybe he said those things all for show. Or some people are saying, well, that's how you make a deal. This is usually what he does. He will make those types of threats and then make a deal. Similar to what happened with North Korea. He made threats towards North Korea when he ran for president in 2016. But then when he won, somehow he managed to establish some type of a healthy relationship with Kim Jong-un. So it was like, we were like, what is happening here? So some people are alluding to that. But when I think about the fact that this is the same ceasefire deal that Joe Biden had back in May, that Israel also refused, that Hamas had accepted, it just goes to show you that, to your point, if Biden really wanted the genocide to stop, he could have done that. He could have stopped sending the weapons, put immense pressure on Bibi, and he chose not to do that because, in my opinion, I believe that he wanted Israel to do exactly what it was doing. He went on to late night TV and he said that he is a staunch Zionist. He criticized Hamas and the Palestinians heavily, so obviously more so publicly than Israel. He continued to give Benjamin Netanyahu the weapons, even though he said we need to move towards some type of agreement. So it was all these things, and he gave them more weapons in December at the end of 2024. So it was obvious that I told people if he really wanted a ceasefire, he would not continue to give them weapons. If he's giving them the weapons, that means he wants them to continue doing what they're doing. And had it not been for the public outcry, I don't even think we would have heard the Democratic Party even talk about a ceasefire. What's your take on that?
I agree completely. And I think perhaps one reason, and again, I'm just speculating, one reason that led Trump to push for the ceasefire, and we don't know what he's going to do tomorrow. We don't know what he's going to do in the West Bank. We don't know if there's been any sort of secret deal with Netanyahu, with AIPAC or the powers that be about the future of our region. So this could be a ceasefire and then we could have some other war somewhere else. It's for me, it's impossible to say. But I think one thing that has happened is that the mood in the and across the world, as I was saying earlier, has changed. But also in the United States, the left and right doesn't mean much anymore in the United States today, because it means different things to different people. But on the left, we know that overwhelmingly people have turned against the Israeli regime. But also, and so Trump, if he was going to support Netanyahu, the left would go after him, obviously. And much of the left, of course, was cautious about Kamala Harris because they wanted her to win, and because the greater evil was out there that they didn't want. But also on the right, whatever that means, you do see see new voices out there, and Candace Owens, for example, or the interviews that some people have that Professor Sachs had with Tucker Carlson. I think that says a lot. I'm not saying that there's a revolution happening, but I think that public opinion in the United States is shifting, and it's been shifting for 15 months now, or at least for a year now, or for over a year. I'm probably not during the first few weeks, but public opinion has shifted. So you see people on the left, on the right, everyone turning against Washington. And so I think there's a lot of pressure inside the United States to bring this to an end. Again, I'm just, I have no idea what Trump's thinking is. But what I do see in the United States, what is encouraging, and some people will say, people, the media and the political establishment can shift public opinion through some outrage tomorrow, which is possible. Some false flag operation, some major catastrophe can suddenly shift people towards some anti-Muslim sentiment or anti-Russian sentiment or anti-Chinese sentiment. All that's possible. But at the moment, people have turned against the Israeli regime, and voices on the left, on the right, are saying things that I never thought you would hear in the United States, and probably that has something to do with his calculations.
Yeah, I could see that as well. Recently, Joe Biden just had an interview with Lawrence O'Donnell about this very same issue. So now that he is exiting his presidency, he's now talking about things that he didn't during his term. And this clip has been going around on Twitter.
He should have had a lawyer.
He should have. This clip that's going around now on Twitter, which is going viral, is Joe Biden in this interview telling Lawrence O'Donnell that he had a conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu and told him that we will give you the supply that you need, but you cannot carpet bomb these people. And he said that Benjamin Netanyahu said to him, well, you did it. And you as in the United States. So he was referring to World War II.
When I went to Israel, immediately after their attack by Hamas, 8 days later, whatever it was, and I told him we were going to help. And I said, but Bibi, I said, you can't be carpet bombing these communities. And he said to me, well, you did it. You carpet bomb, not his exact words, but you carpet bomb Berlin. You dropped a nuclear weapon. You killed thousands of innocent people because you had to in order to win a war. I said, but that's why came up with the UN. New deals by which what we would do relative to civilians and military.
So he was comparing 21st century war tactics, battle tactics, with World War II.
Well, what he was really doing is he was going after me for saying you can't indiscriminately bomb civilian areas, even if the bad guys are there. Even if the bad guys are there, you can't take out 2, 10, 12, 1,500 people, innocent people, in order to get the one bad guy. And he made the legitimate argument. His perspective said, look, these are the guys that kill my people. These are the guys that are all over in these tunnels. Nobody had any idea the miles of tunnels were down there. It's amazing what they built. And they're sometimes 200 feet under the ground. Only way to get to them is to take out the places where they were under which they got to the tunnels.
War criminal. And
so that's the first time I had the discussion about bombing civilian areas was when I went over after the 9/11, after the massacre that occurred.
So on that first trip, 10, 11 days after October 7th, you already raised the issues of how to get to a ceasefire.
You don't regret saying that.
Well, not a ceasefire, how to prevent innocent death.
Yes.
Then I pushed really, really hard for more humanitarian aid to go in.
Now Joe Biden is trying to make it seem like, well, I did put this pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. I really did push back against him. But I think we all know this isn't true. Because if you were really trying to stop him from carpet bombing people, you wouldn't have continued to give him the weapons. And one of the demands that was from Abandon Harris, or Abandon Biden, which became Abandon Harris, and of course, I remember correctly, the Uncommitted movement, was to stop the weapons, like stop sending the weapons to Israel, which at no point did Biden or Harris say they were willing to do. When Biden dropped out of the race and Harris was running, when she was asked about this question, she said she is not going to do that. So that was another thing, again, where if they really wanted to stop this, they could have done so. Why do you feel that now Joe Biden is now publicly coming forward to say, oh, well, let me tell you what happened behind the scenes when none of this was said during his presidency?
I think it's because he recognizes how bad things are. But his statement only made things worse, because he basically admitted that Netanyahu's intention was to carpet bomb, and that he gave him the weapons to carry out that carpet bombing and those atrocities, despite knowing what his intentions were. And again, I think that Biden should have had a lawyer sitting beside him during the interview. But I think it also shows how horrible Washington is, and how horrible his advisors are, and the sort of nonsense that his national security advisor, a Zionist, and his Secretary of State, another Zionist, have been telling him, another Zionist, what to say and how to behave and how to conduct himself. When you look at what Max Blumenthal and Mr. Hosseini, is it Sam Hosseini or Sam Hosseini? I think it's Sam Hosseini, right?
Yeah.
What they did, I think that was very very heroic, and very it was fantastic what they did.
Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing. Why did you sacrifice the rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism? Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you allow my friends' homes in Gaza to be destroyed when we had a deal in May? You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating it with fascism. You waved the white flag before Netanyahu. You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
I look forward to taking questions when I get a chance.
Your father-in-law was an Israel lobbyist. Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirk through the whole thing every day. You smirk through a genocide.
2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I'm asking questions. Wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders. You
Please respect the process.
Oh, respect the process. Respect the process. While everybody from Amnesty International. From Amnesty International to the ICJ saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal, why aren't you in The Hague?
But I think it is also, it also reveals, I think it explains what's going on in the United States today, and how outraged people are, and how outside the bubble in Washington, people see reality. And that's why Max can say this and he goes viral. That's why Sam Hosseini can stand up like that, and people congratulate him and Max for what they've done, because the mood has changed. So Biden somehow wanted to make this seem that he wanted to show himself as a person who didn't want any of this to happen. But basically what he did was he told us all that I knew what was going to happen, and I let it happen anyway.
Exactly. And this brings up the question about a country like Yemen, for example. We all know that Yemen has had tremendous devastation under Donald Trump's presidency. And now with Trump coming back in, it makes me wonder about the Houthis. It makes me wonder, is there going to be more effort there? Like, is the U.S. going to try to intervene there to remove the Houthis? Are they going to go after them the same way they allowed Israel to go after Hamas? And I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
Well, actually, Yemen began under Obama. It began in 2015. And it was more or less during the period of the nuclear negotiations between Iran and the P5+1. And it was at that time that Obama gave Mohammed bin Salman the green light to carry out the attack on Yemen. And it's widely believed that he did that because the Saudis were concerned about the nuclear negotiations. He gave this green light to compensate for the nuclear negotiations, so that the Saudis would not complain about the nuclear negotiations. I should add that when Saudi Arabia and the Emirates began that genocidal war in Yemen, which was a genocide like Gaza, not only did they have the full support of NATO, Canada, Britain, France, Australia, and the others, but also media outlets like Al Jazeera, which that have shown sympathy for the Palestinians, they were supporting the Saudis. And I got banned. I got banned on Al Jazeera twice. One was during the beginning of the Syrian dirty war. I was invited on Al Jazeera a few times, and then I'd be disinvited. They'd say, "Oh, the show has been canceled or the subject has changed," and I thought that was normal. But it was happening a lot. They'd call me and invite me, and then they'd cancel. And then once I was sitting at lunch on campus, and they called me and asked me to be on the show, and then they canceled, and they said the topic has changed. And then they called the person sitting next to me and say, "Can you participate?" And then I found out it was me. So these different producers apparently were inviting me, and then they were told that they had to disinvite me. And then I sent a letter, an email, back then it was emails, to a number of people on Al Jazeera and said, "Look, if you don't want me, don't invite me." And then people from inside Al Jazeera were saying that, "Look, you've been banned because you were opposed to the dirty war in Syria." And then again, I was banned after being on Al Jazeera on Inside Story a couple of times, speaking out against the genocide. So, but in any case, back then, the point I'm trying to make was that Yemen was very much alone, and much more alone than the people of Gaza were. They didn't have the sort of global sympathy that Gaza had, and they had the tens and hundreds of billions of dollars of Saudi money and Emirati money were being spent on this war. And the American Navy was imposing a siege in the Red Sea. And unfortunately, because of the propaganda, a lot of people, even in our region, were not sympathetic to them. And they only became, and many people's views only changed over Gaza when they saw that the same people who no one supported and no one helped and everyone was backing the aggressor, they still stood up for the Palestinian people. And Yemen became, and Ansarullah, or the Houthis as they call them in the West, became household names and heroes that probably, they and Hezbollah, the biggest heroes, because they willingly put themselves at risk. But in any case, I don't think that the American government can overthrow Ansarullah because Yemen is a large country. It is a mountainous country. I think they would put up a much tougher fight than what they experienced in Afghanistan. And Yemen is a very sophisticated people, it is probably the most ancient civilization. I mean, I'm not an archaeologist, obviously, but our region is full of ancient civilizations. Iran, Iraq, Syria. Yemen is older than everyone. So, it's an ancient people. And I don't think that the Americans, and there have been many wars waged on Yemen by Egypt, by others. Everyone has failed. So I don't think that the Americans would succeed. Ansarullah, what they've done, they've played a huge role in bringing about the ceasefire because they forced the Israelis and their allies to pay a heavy price, an economic price. And no matter what the Americans and the British and the Israelis did, they could not open the Red Sea to their shipping. And so, but now if there is a ceasefire, my understanding is that the Red Sea will be open if there's a real ceasefire. And I don't think that the Americans would have an excuse to attack. But if they could have attacked, they would have, I think, by now. I don't think the world is ready for, or the people in the West or the world will accept another war. I really think this ceasefire, regardless of what happens, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but these ceasefire, if after the ceasefire, I think it's going to be more difficult for the Israeli regime to wage new wars. They may do it, but it's going to make them look even worse because the world is now saying, wow, it's great, it's over. And then if they're going to start again in the West Bank or start in Lebanon or in Gaza, I think it's going to get much worse and much, and for the Israelis and for their supporters, both in the West and across the world. It's just, people are disgusted and exhausted with what's going on. But Yemen, I think they're very powerful, they're very steadfast, and I think that is one reason why I don't believe that the Americans really are in a position to attack Iran, because they've tried to defeat Yemen for 15 months now, and they failed. Iran is infinitely stronger than Yemen. Iran's missile defense capabilities, its missile offensive capabilities are infinitely greater, and the Persian Gulf region is just a bunch of glass palaces, all these tiny family dictatorships with a lot of oil and gas wealth. I don't see how any good will come out of some conflict with Iran in the Persian Gulf region. It would create a global economic catastrophe. So the United States doesn't have any good options. But U.S. elites, they're not always very sane. They've destroyed. The United States was at the top of the world 20, 30 years ago with the collapse of. I personally think that the collapse of the Soviet Union and the U.S. victory over Saddam Hussein in Kuwait in 1990, 1991 were two catastrophes for the West, because they made Western elites think that we've reached the end of history. Remember Fukuyama, and that the West it was the unipolar moment, and that the United States it was it was a hyperpower, as one person once called it. And that made the United States become more aggressive. The ghost of Vietnam, was gone. And the United States became very reckless. And since, for the last 20, 25 years, it's been all downhill for the West. And I think it continues to go downhill very rapidly. Another war, I think, would just end it. The empire would just simply collapse.
Very interesting. I noticed the other day as well. I know we've been talking about Antony Blinken a lot since the disruption there from Max Blumenthal and Sam Husseini. And kudos to both of them. And I feel like every journalist in that room should have stood up with them. I think that would have been the right thing to do. But there was something else that Antony Blinken said in a previous press conference. I think it was the day right before that one. He said he's finally now saying this out in the open, that Israel has to treat the Palestinians like people, and that they can't continue to basically treat them the way that they've been treating them. Of course, he said none of this during the Biden-Harris administration. What do you think his angle is here? Why is it that all of a sudden now he's saying that Israel, or admitting that Israel has not been treating the Palestinians like people?
I think it's clear. I think they all recognize what has happened. They can no longer, the emperor has no clothes. They've been exposed. The forces of genocide. Why are young people so angry about TikTok? Why are they shutting down TikTok? Because of Israel. I mean, they talk about China and all that, but the real reason, I think it's quite clear, is because people are seeing images of genocide every day, morning, afternoon, night. You wake up in the morning, more scenes. It's never ending, and people have woken up. I mean, when you see even Trump, for whatever reason, repost Professor Sachs' speech at, I think, the Oxford Union, or part of that speech, about the dirty war in Syria, about how evil Netanyahu is, then I think it shows how bad things are. So these people are looking, they want to go tomorrow, to teach at, I don't know, Columbia or some other university, and they don't want people to suddenly stand up and call them genocidal monsters. They want to, back in the old days when a secretary of state or a president would retire, they would be treated, as royalty till the end of their days. Even Nixon was, was treated pretty well. That world has changed. Social media has changed all that, and I think these people recognize, but it's too late, and it just shows how detached they are from reality, because it's sort of like Hitler being arrested and saying, I was opposed to all this. It just makes it worse. If this is your crime, just say yes, I did this. But when at the end, when you say, I didn't want any of this to happen, it's like a serial killer being arrested and saying, I didn't want any of this to happen. I'm so upset. Or doesn't mean anything. It just makes people more angry. So again, I think that they're being poorly advised, just like what happened to Max and to Sam Husseini. If I was the State Department, I wouldn't have kicked them out of the room. I would have let them say what they want to say, and then I would have just made the stupid justifications that lack morality, as I did for the whole last 15 months. It would have been much better. You and I would have read it, some other people would have watched it, and it would have been over. But they chose to, drag Max out, or sort of push him out, and then literally have 3 men pick up Sam and throw him out. And look, everyone, the whole world saw it. If they were sane, if they were not living in their bubble, they would recognize that this was the most stupid thing that they could have done.
Right. They gave them more attention by doing that because even corporate media covered it because of that. So it's, yeah, I don't know who's advising them. These consultant groups obviously do not have the best intentions at hand. Like they just really don't know what they're doing. And that brings up the question of what's next. So I read through the terms of the ceasefire, and it seems that there's different stages. So stage 1, stage 2, et cetera. My question is, what happens to Gaza? And there have been talks about rebuilding Gaza, but what happens to the Palestinians that are still alive in Gaza after all this is said and done? Because is Israel still going to be allowed to occupy them, you think? Is it still going to have a fenced border? Like what? Things cannot obviously remain the same, I would think. But what happens after that?
Well, this is not going to lead to liberation. It's going to take us back to almost where we were 15, 16 months ago. Reason why, well, one reason why October the 7th happened was because Gaza was an open air prison. It was a concentration camp. People were living in misery. Of course, the misery that they experience now is infinitely worse, but it was a very bad place. For some wealthy people, there were some good neighborhoods, but for the most part, it was terrible. There were no jobs, there was no future, there was no place to go, and every now and then the Israelis would carry out genocidal airstrikes. They could do whatever they wanted. If people protested, you recall the peaceful protests that they had alongside the apartheid wall. Then the Israeli snipers would have they would compete with each other to shoot kneecaps and to kill people and to murder medics and all that. If it's peaceful, they kill them. If they defend themselves militarily, they're murdered. Israelis could do whatever they want. So Gaza is not going to be liberated, but the Israeli regime has been severely weakened. There's no doubt about that. It's not just about failing in the war. They failed in Lebanon. They said they were going to go all the way to take the south of Lebanon and defeat Hezbollah. They failed. Hezbollah has its arms, and in future they could strike the Israeli regime. They said they'll take Gaza. They failed, and they couldn't do anything about the Red Sea. But most importantly, and of course the economy, but most importantly, they've been exposed to the world as an illegitimate, brutal, and barbaric and genocidal regime. And I think that's far worse than anything else for Israel. It will impact it until the end of Israel. And I think this is the beginning of the end. But I think it will be a bumpy road ahead. The ceasefire may fall, it may collapse, but it won't be good for Trump if it does. Because Trump has said, I've succeeded here. And if he fails, he can't blame it on the Palestinians. No one in the world is going to accept it. He can't, say they raped someone or they beheaded someone. That's not going to work anymore. That's over. So if the Israelis choose to humiliate Trump, then that will get interest. So Trump is in this. If he does implement it, there will be opportunities, of course, for reconstruction. It won't be a nice place because it's, in 2023, it wasn't a nice place. And in 2013, it wasn't a nice place. And in 2003, it wasn't a nice place. These are refugees who were expelled from their homes and forced into Gaza. Gaza was a small town before people across Palestine were ethnically cleansed and pushed into Gaza, just like the West Bank. Much of the population of the Palestinians in the West Bank are refugees, just like the Palestinians in Lebanon, in Egypt, and in Syria, and those who've just left the region. So There's going to be a long road ahead, and I'm sure that the Israelis will do what they can to make it difficult. But this is a major humiliation for the Israeli regime. It has exposed it as extremely weak, because as you know, we all know where the power lies. They could have been stopped on day one. There's always this ongoing. There's been long this discussion about is Israel the side that makes the decision, or is it Washington? Is it Tel Aviv, or is it Washington? Who holds the real power? I think it's the Zionist lobby, and they are Jewish, they're Christian, and they're secular. It's just a lobby, the Zionist lobby, whatever. But some may be Muslim. I don't know, whatever. But they have been, I think they've been badly weakened, because we now know that Netanyahu could have been stopped, because for whatever reason, Trump forced them to stop, for whatever reason. And if he fails, as I was saying a few minutes earlier, he will be utterly humiliated, because he said, I've done it. The deal's been done. So it's a very interesting situation. But Gaza was not a good place compared to what it is now. Of course, anything is better, but it will not be liberated. But this is, we have to remember that the road to liberation is a tough road, whether it's slaves in America, whether it's Algerians in North Africa, whether it's apartheid South Africa. Throughout history, the oppressor I don't recall anywhere with an oppressor voluntarily gave away its power and gave the rights to the oppressed. It's never happened before. It comes at a heavy price. So some may say no, and I think it's a victory for the resistance. It's a victory for the axis of resistance. It's a victory for Hezbollah and Ansarullah and all the protesters across the world, Jews, Christians, Muslims. There are many people like Max Blumenthal in the United States now. There are many people, you have these. I remember there was this lone young lady. There was a photo I remember last year I retweeted. She was some young lady in Seoul, in South Korea. Every day she'd protest in front of the Israeli embassy. But now the mood is people, whoever you speak with, wherever you go, people are against this. So I think this is a major victory for the resistance, for the Palestinian people, but it came at a horrible price. But hopefully things will get better, and hopefully liberation will come, and it won't be as bad in future as it was over the past 15 months.
And I think this really exposes Israel, because one of the other things that was mentioned at the previous press conference that Antony Blinken had was that Hamas has obviously not been defeated, but also that more people may have joined Hamas now, which is what we all said, like in the beginning, like if you're there in Gaza and you're not a part of Hamas and you see Israel killing all these kids, like hospitals, etc., if anything, that would encourage you to, if you weren't a part of Hamas, that would encourage you to join, to fight back, to be a part of that resistance. It's so the fact that this has gone on for as long as it had, number one, is insane to me. It's ridiculous. But number two, Israel never accomplished the goal of capturing Hamas, and they still don't have the hostages, which we've said before. It wasn't really about the hostages. And we've been saying this since day one. They had several opportunities to get those hostages back to their families. And every time they decided that exterminating the Palestinian people is more important. So they really didn't care about their own people. Don't forget about the Hannibal Directive. They would be willing, someone like Netanyahu would be willing to let those hostages die in exchange for him to kill all the Palestinian people. And that's what I think some people just didn't understand. I think more people see it now, but They never accomplished their goal. If you come to me and you tell me that Hamas is in the tunnels, why isn't your military going into the tunnels? Because the goal in my mind, again, was never really to defeat Hamas. It was to kill all the Palestinian people.
Absolutely. And I think that Anthony Blinken, and I think that Biden, and I think that Jake Sullivan, and I think most of these senators and congressmen and women, that was their objective too. I think they knew this, and many of the journalists. When the war started in Lebanon, I immediately went there. And I was in Beirut when Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was martyred. I was actually probably 1,000 meters away from the strikes, where they brought down 6 residential towers to murder him. They slaughtered all sorts of innocent people. And I stayed in Lebanon for a week to do media. I mean, I took some aid, but then I was just busy doing media. And the regime, they were just bombing civilian targets in Beirut and Dahia and other parts of Beirut and other cities. And Western main legacy media journalists were inviting me on sometimes on air, sometimes they talk with me. And they were like, they keep saying Hezbollah strongholds. Whenever the Israelis would bomb, but the Israelis were saying that, these are Hezbollah targets, or there's another thing that they'd say, Hezbollah targets, Hezbollah stronghold, whatever. And I was telling these people, look, your fixer is Lebanese. Many of them know these are ordinary apartments that are being bombed. Why do you keep saying Hezbollah stronghold? Why do you keep saying Hezbollah target every time you do a report? The guy standing beside you, your cameraman, the guy who's arranging for your guests, these are Lebanese. Some of them live in those neighborhoods. And you keep saying these are strongholds. They're just ordinary people living in those buildings. They all knew. I maybe I shouldn't say this, but I was invited to tour southern Beirut while it was being bombed during the first few days. And I went with a couple of people. And there were journalists touring southern Beirut. And the Hezbollah official, who was later martyred by the Israelis, he was showing us around, and he was very worried because if we had been separated, then the Israelis may have bombed us or other journalists. And one journalist, one Western journalist, and I should be careful, came up to me. That person, he or she, said, "Hi, I'm so and so." I'd seen that person before on media, and said to me, he or she was being friendly and was trying to say, "I agree with what you say in your interviews. I'm not like the others." That person, she or he, said, "I'm not like the others." The point is that they know. Now, this person was a very decent person. I'm sure that person, she or he, was doing the best that could be done. But many of these journalists know what's going on. They knew what was going on. And they chose to protect the genocide, just like weapons of mass destruction. I was a PhD student. I gave an exam in Iran and I won a scholarship, went and did my PhD in the UK. Back then, they didn't have a PhD program in my field in Iran. And so now they do, and my old students, my PhD students, are better than me. We have fantastic graduates from Iranian universities. My own colleagues, young colleagues, are way better than me. But anyway, we knew when the United States wanted to invade Iraq that there were no chemical weapons. I survived chemical weapons. I knew Saddam Hussein once upon a time had chemical weapons. The West gave them to him when he was their ally. I survived the mustard gas attack in 1988. The Iranian calendar is different from the English calendar, but I think, yeah, it was 1988. And I survived a nerve agent in 1984. These were chemical weapons that the Germans gave to Saddam Hussein. Remember gas chambers and all that? The Germans gave them to Saddam Hussein. and back then he was their ally. But we knew that Saddam didn't have chemical weapons, and I was a part of the anti-war. I think I was actually in the first. I may have been in the first anti-war protest in the UK. It was in Birmingham. It was actually against the war in Afghanistan. There were like 70 of us. The prime minister came to Birmingham to open the at the University of Birmingham the European Institute, or the an institute for the study of Europe, whatever. And there was a small group of us who were against the invasion of Afghanistan, and we were protesting because we were saying that you created the mess in Afghanistan. And so I remained a part of that anti-war movement, and I participated in that huge anti-war protest in London. Why? Because everyone knew there were no chemical weapons. People across the UK, even though the BBC supported the war, even though all the television networks, all the media, they supported it, people knew that they were lying. So, the media in Lebanon, they knew that the Israelis were just targeting civilian targets. The media knew that the Israelis were just carrying out slaughter. So it wasn't just Antony Blinken. It wasn't just Jake Sullivan. It wasn't just Biden. This was a conspiracy of silence. This was a conspiracy where all these people participated in, European leaders, European journalists. I'm not saying all journalists, but I'm talking about mainstream media in general. They were part of this. They knew this. And we were all, when we were all speaking against this, you were speaking against this, we were all speaking against this, we knew that what was happening. And now suddenly, they come out on television and say, yes, Netanyahu said this, and, I said, don't carpet bomb, please. It's not a nice thing to do. And then, Blinken. And by the way, in that previous session that you spoke about, Antony Blinken being, there were also two young ladies or two women who are also heroic, I think, in that session, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not. I don't follow these things as much as, but they didn't become all that famous. But they too interrupted Blinken, and they ruined his day. And so what happened in this final session, I think, was fantastic. Those two are, their names we don't know, but what they did was just as heroic, but they were just not as famous. But these four people, I think, what they did was extraordinary, and I think it sort of exposes what's happening. That these people are living in a bubble. They think that they're fooling the rest of us, and they're not. And now they're trying to fool us by saying, we didn't want this to happen, but they're not fooling us either now.
And when that doesn't work, then they try to control the source of information, which is why they're trying to ban TikTok, which is why they wanted to cut down more on censorship, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Facebook, although Facebook says they're not going to censor people now is a whole different thing. I think that's just Zuckerberg trying to get more people from TikTok to come back over to Facebook. But it's all like the point that you bring up there about the media. This is the very important point, because if corporate media tells you the truth, then I would also argue that this would have been over a long time ago. But the media, particularly in this country, corporate media backs the State Department talking points, and they repeat whatever political party they're supporting. They repeat those talking points. Now, all of a sudden, everybody is talking about we have an oligarchy forming in this country, which we've always had as long as I've been alive. So it's not a new thing. But because Joe Biden said it during his farewell address, now all of a sudden it's okay for MSNBC to acknowledge this as well. And so I hope more people are like waking up to this because they do control the narrative. And the only way to break through that narrative, I think, has been through social media and independent media and various platforms. And I'm thankful for TikTok because they were able to get the message about across about Israel and the creation of Israel and what the Palestinian people have been going through. And I can only imagine, like, if we didn't have social media, how would this have been perceived?
Absolutely, just like Vietnam. Vietnam, it took years for the mood to change, and I think it was partially because everyone was involved, because all Americans had to serve, or all males had to serve in the army back then. It was a conscript army. So in the early years, those who were anti-war were basically considered to be anti-American. The most famous case, of course, being Muhammad Ali, who was hated and despised. And then only much later did he become a hero for not going to war. But it was only because so many young Americans had to go to war and they had to experience Vietnam and to be a part of the atrocities, or then to most Americans didn't actually. I'm not sure if most actually opposed the war when it came to an end, but the United States became very divided. But now, because it's not a conscript army, and the American, ordinary Americans don't see what's really going on, what happened to Iraq, what happened to Afghanistan, and only so-called professional soldiers were involved. I think it's much worse. And without social media, I think there would really be no way to have so many people wake up to this reality. They're just completely detached with what's going on the ground in this part of the world. But social media has made a huge change. Of course, I don't believe that they will. I've been removed from Facebook years ago. I've been removed from Instagram. All Iranian state medias has been sanctioned many years ago, and now the Russians, we see their media is the same, and we see many Iranians, their accounts have been removed. I know students, my own students, and who say, who come to me and say, I follow you on Twitter, but I don't do any likes or retweets because I'm afraid that if one day I want to study abroad or go abroad, then they will check my account and I'll get into trouble. So you see how they are able to control populations and how people react to events in the West. But it's become so bad what they've done in Gaza. It's just unbelievable. It's probably the worst crime in human history because we've been able to watch it. I mean, there have been greater crimes where larger numbers of people have been slaughtered, but we've been watching it unfold for 15 months now, and they've been pushing and pushing and pushing to have it continue, to continue it, to finish, as you were saying, to finish off these Palestinians. And that, I think, is what makes this probably the worst crime in human history, or at least one of them, because they've been doing it shamelessly in front of us. But the tide has turned. Public has turned against it. I don't know how it will be in future with social media. I'm not optimistic about. I mean, the TikTok ban, I think, is probably going to make things more difficult, but it's been so bad that I don't think that Israel can ever make up for this. It's just too late. They've been destroyed. Zionism has been destroyed. And the one thing that Max said when he was being taken out of the room is that, what he was saying to the Secretary of State was that I think he said you destroyed Judaism. And these people are the enemies of Judaism, because they've done all this in the name of Jews. And thankfully, there are lots of young people like Max and others who better than I, who've shown that no, it's not all Jews by any means, and they are the anti-Semites. Although Palestinians are Semites, but that aside, but they are in fact anti-Jews because they're committing these crimes in front of us in the name of Jews. But fortunately, lots of young Jews are pushing back, and they're pushing back hard and with effect.
Professor Morandi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, January 17th, 2025. It's the end of the day, the end of the week, time for our Intelligence Community Roundtable. Larry Johnson is with us as always, and Scott Ritter is sitting in for Ray McGovern. Gentlemen, welcome here. Always a pleasure. Larry, to you first. Is the deal as we understand it for a ceasefire in Gaza, negotiated by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, along with Israel and Hamas? Is it a real serious ceasefire, or is it a inauguration pause?
Depends on who you're talking to. I think from the standpoint of Hamas and from the Arab leaders, it's a real deal. I think from the standpoint of Bibi Netanyahu and his cronies, they're going to try to get away with this being just a phase one, and then they get to go back to business as usual and killing Palestinians. The wild card here is what I'll call, Trump's narcissism. And, I take with a grain of salt the fact that Trump's been the only narcissistic president. Excuse me. Let's line up Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and even George W. Bush.
Sure.
It's a sea of narcissism. But the thing that Trump's got invested here is Trump's not just trying to cater to the right-wing Israeli, the ultra-Zionist faction. I think he really wants to establish a legacy of having brought peace to the Middle East. That's what he wants. Now, he has surrounded himself with a bunch of, Christian Zionists that are, fully in bed with Bibi Netanyahu and his ultra-right-wing extremists. But never discount the possibility that Trump wants to be liked by the Arabs as well. And he's not going to sacrifice his legacy to save Bibi Netanyahu. That much I'm sure of.
Seen that one already.
Russia's closing ties with China, with its military alliance with North Korea, and then with Iran. We've been talking for a long time that Iran has been providing Shahed drones and several other classes of ballistic missiles, etc. Lots of support. Well, now then, not only has Iran joined with the BRICS in general with an economic situation, now in just the last 12 hours or so, Russia and Iran have signed a new agreement, a 20-year agreement that has a lot of economics and other things that are involved with it, one of which is a nuclear power plant. So Russia is deepening its involvement in the area, which is going to complicate a number of other things. To try and make sense of all this and try to figure out what it does mean, especially for U.S. interests, both in the Russia-Ukraine war and in the Middle East, is John Mearsheimer. Professor Mearsheimer, international relations theorist, professor of political science at the University of Chicago, and a friend of the show. Professor, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here, Danny.
Well, listen, we've talked a lot about some of the unintended consequences of our actions supporting, as long as it takes, the Ukraine side in its war with Russia, ejecting every opportunity to have any kind of either a diplomatic settlement or a negotiated end to the war through many opportunities throughout the last 3 years. Now here we are on the eve of transferring power to the incoming Trump administration. And I just wonder if you think it's any kind of intention or coincidence, or just that's the way it worked out, that Russia chose this moment to sign this deal with Iran on nuclear power.
I think they might have chosen this moment, but it doesn't matter very much. They could have done it a week ago, or they could do it a week from now. I think what's going on here, Danny, is that the Russians have two goals. Excuse me. The first is to make sure that Iran does not acquire nuclear weapons. The Russians are well aware that the Iranians have a powerful incentive to acquire a nuclear deterrent. That's point one. And point two, the Iranians are susceptible to an American and an Israeli attack. And I think the Russians want to do everything they can to help the Iranians protect themselves and therefore deter such an attack. The Russians don't want to see the United States gain a significant advantage in terms of global influence by doing great damage to Iran. So I think what's happening here is that the Russians are moving closer to the Iranians, and I think the Russians are going to give the Iranians economic assistance and conventional military assistance. I think the Russians want to see Iran develop the capability to protect its nuclear installations and other installations across the country with conventional weapons so that they don't go down the nuclear road, and so that at the same time, the Americans are deterred. So I would expect moving forward, we will see ever increasing relations between Russia and Iran. This will be the first major step. Much of it will be aimed at the United States.
And to what extent is it even possible? And we haven't heard any reports to this effect, but I just wonder what your, because you obviously have a significant understanding of how all the different players work together in the region, that there might have been some discussions behind the scenes between the United States and Russia, because I think that the U.S. is not wanted to get into a war with Iran. And certainly, I think a lot of evidence indicates that Netanyahu would have loved nothing more than to get the U.S. sucked into a war to try and take out Iran. But that Russia may have said, hey, it's no one's interest for this to go anywhere. We're going to deepen our cooperation here, so don't attack it. And then perhaps as a quid pro quo, we'll keep them from getting a nuclear weapon. Do you think anything like that may be in part of it?
Absolutely. I think you're right on the money. I think the Russians, the Iranians, and the Americans all have an interest in no war. They do not want war, any one of those three countries. I think it's the Israelis who want war. And the great danger is that the Israelis will drag the Americans in. This worries the Russians greatly. And as a result, the Russians are not only sending a clear signal to the Americans, but they're helping the Iranians to defend themselves with conventional weapons. And as I said, that has the added benefit of greatly discouraging the Iranians from going down the nuclear road.
Now we're gonna talk a little bit about the Middle Eastern part here in a second, because there's some obviously direct connections with that as well. But I want to talk about one of the other things that's part of this agreement here, and I want you to talk about some of the implications of this. Now, obviously, we've been talking a long time about the drones, some ballistic missiles that Iran has been provided. So Russia has an incentive to keep Iran viable and to keep them out of war, also for the BRICS issue. But as this report from Deutsche Welle shows, there's another aspect of this.
It's not just defense ties that are being put on a new footing. After their first meeting in October 2024, the two presidents said they had many similar views on world affairs and were keen to expand cooperation in all areas, economically, culturally, and in the international arena. They said deepening ties was a way of countering the punishing sanctions that the US and its allies have imposed on both countries. And they're pushing for completion of this alternative route for global trade, known as the North-South Transport Corridor, and already years in the making. It would open a pathway to India and the Gulf while bypassing the sea lanes of the West.
And to what significance is that they might have this new pipeline which can allow oil and gas to bypass some of the routes from the West, therefore minimizing the leverage that the West could bring for future sanctions between, especially against Ukraine, because that's obviously Iran and Russia are both significant recipients of American sanctions. What will this impact will have on the leverage we may have?
Well, just to, elevate the conversation for a brief second, when we were talking a minute ago about Iran, Russia, and the United States, we were focusing on the military dimension. I think what Trump will actually try to do when he comes into power is not attack Iran, but use a strategy of what's called maximum pressure. And putting maximum pressure on Iran means putting maximum economic pressure on Iran, doing everything possible to wreck the Iranian economy. And of course, the Russians understand this because they've been victims of American sanctions. The United States is not only trying to wreck the Iranian economy, it's trying to wreck the Russian economy. And what's going on here is that the Russians are trying to figure out ways, and the Iranians are as well, as to how to combat this economic pressure. And this pipeline is a giant step in that direction, because what it does is it makes it much more difficult for the West, and here we're talking mainly about the United States, to use its significant leverage to cut off oil in the region.
Yeah, and there you see Gary putting on the screen right there. That's already, Trump's envoy, General Kellogg's already talking about, we have to reinstate maximum pressure. I wonder if you can just touch on that a second ago. And was the original iteration of maximum pressure, was that really effective and useful for United States interest in its exchange with the Iranian regime?
No, it failed. I mean, here's basically what happened. In 2015, the Obama administration came up with the JCPOA. This is the nuclear agreement that greatly limited Iran's nuclear capability and made it virtually impossible for it to develop nuclear weapons. The Israelis were deeply unhappy with the agreement, and the Trump administration, after significant pressure was put on it by the Israelis, walked away from the JCPOA in 2018.
Right. Yeah, I actually remember that was May 2018, specific. But before you even get much further with that, I wonder if you can answer something that has frankly puzzled me throughout the duration of this. Why would Israel be so against the JCPOA when it curtailed the Iranian potential drive towards a nuclear weapon?
It's very simple, Danny. The JCPOA did not eliminate Iran's capability to either enrich uranium or recycle plutonium and turn them into weapons-grade material. That's really what the Israelis fear, right? That Iran has the capability to enrich uranium and reprocess plutonium. And that's what they want in a new deal. If the Trump administration could get a new JCPOA that got rid of Iran's capability to produce fissile material, and again, that's enriching uranium and reprocessing plutonium, the Israelis would be reasonably happy. They're never too happy with anything, but they would be reasonably happy. And it was the failure to get that pushed the Israelis to put pressure on the Americans to walk away from the JCPOA. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So what would have happened? And there was a lot of concern, and I think probably rightfully so, after Trump was elected and before January 20th, that there was a risk that Israel may say, hey, we're going to take action against Iran now, so that Trump's hands will be tied before he even gets in office, and he'll have to continue on because they'll have this engagement started here. And one of the things that they were primarily focused on, the Israeli side, was the destruction of the capacity for the Iran to do that very thing. You're basically saying to destroy their centrifuges and their processing facilities. Unfortunately, many of them for Israel were underground, and we don't know if they could have actually done it. But in your estimation, what would have been the result in Iran's ability or willingness or desire or ability to actually later on get a nuclear weapon if they had been hit like Israel was claiming that they were thinking of doing?
Well, a couple points, Danny. First of all, Israel does not have the capability to take down Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The United States is needed. Second point is, it's not clear that the United States can do it. There's a reasonable chance we could take down almost all of the nuclear infrastructure that Iran has, but it's not for certain. And the third point, which addresses your question, is that even if we take down that nuclear infrastructure, almost everybody I know, and this includes some very hawkish people, believes that eventually Iran would reconstitute the program and they would end up with nuclear weapons. If Iran is determined to get nuclear weapons, there's no way that the United States can prevent that over time.
short of an outright Iraq-style invasion, right?
Yes, that's right. But we're not going to invade Iran. That would really be crazy.
Right. Yeah. It's I say that with an uncomfortable chuckle because yes, on the surface it would actually, even beneath the surface, it would be insane and absurd. But wow, how many things have we done that in the last couple of decades that did make any sense? But well, anyway, we'll not speculate any further on that one.
But Dan, just quickly to go back to maximum pressure, once the Trump administration pulled out of the JCPOA, they put in place a policy of maximum pressure, which was economic coercion based on sanctions. And it failed. And in fact, today, Iran is not far from where it would have enough fissile material for 4 bombs. So pulling out of the JCPOA was actually a colossal mistake.
And so what would he go, or what would even be the intention of going back to maximum pressure? What do they think it will accomplish in a new iteration that it didn't accomplish in the last? I'm truly not clear on what the objective would be of going back to maximum pressure.
I don't know. I mean, they probably are telling themselves a story that we just weren't tough enough at the time. The Biden administration wasn't tough enough. So if we redouble our efforts, it will work. But the problem there is that, as you pointed out, the Russians have just consummated this deal with the Iranians that is designed to deal with maximum pressure. So if it didn't work the last time, why should we expect it to work this time? And the answer is we shouldn't. And what makes me nervous about that is that will give the Trump administration and the Israelis something of an incentive to attack Iran.
Yeah, that's the last thing that we need. Let's I want to shift gears here a little bit, just a little bit. So we've been talking about Russia and Iran here, but one of the other big things about the incoming Trump administration, of course, is what they're going to do with the Ukraine war and the Russia with that as well. And kind of to set the stage for some of the questions I'll ask, I want to go a quick update of the tactical situation so people can see. Oops, lost on my screen. There we go. Wanted to see kind of what's going on, because these is going to, what's going on the ground is what's going to end up shaping what can happen in the diplomatic arena here. And really, there's been in just even the last 36 or so hours, there's been a lot of updates, even in the northern part here, up in the Kursk area. The Russians can have, again, after some weather-related pauses, have continued to squeeze in from the flanks. In the western flank here, they were able to take yet more territory, and it's squeezing further down here. They're already having, because of the attacks that are going on here, they're moving closer to the one remaining major artery that the Ukraine side can use to get troops in and out, supplies in and out. And if they cut this stuff off here, they won't even have to take Suja the hard way or any of these things up here. Once these things get cut off, then the whole thing will wither and die on the vein. So I'm thinking that's probably what they're going to do. There's been an additional, just in the last 24 hours, information of it up in the Kharkiv area. Now, this has been kind of a stoic place for a long time. There's just been, periodic attacks back and forth across the lines, which basically haven't even moved for the last 6 or so months. But now all of a sudden, the Russians are starting to move a little bit more forward here. Now, that's interesting and noteworthy, because another new area is down here in the Kupiansk area has also been moving forward. And there's some indication that the Russians may be moving in a direction forward here, when they had been moving in this direction here, but they may be thinking, hey, we're going to try perhaps a new offensive early in 25 that's going to try and bring these two things together here. There have been a number of troops that have been seen up in these areas around, which would not be hard to move into effect there. But in any case, there are Russian tactical advantages in both Kupiansk and in the Kharkiv area. And then also in the let's see, I think it's the Chasiv Yar area, but most especially in the Pokrovsk area. I want to zero in on that one here, because that's kind of the one of the next main one here. And there is, after a bit of a pause that they had in this direction here, they have increased significantly back up in the I guess, the left flank area there. So it looks like that Russia's not going to try and just take this head on, but to try and cut off the lines of communication here. They've already cut this one off here on the right flank. They're moving now on the left flank, and very soon this is going to be an untenable situation for the Ukraine as well. And as I think you and I've talked about before, beyond the Pokrovsk area, there are very few defensive fortifications left. And as a lot of reporting has been shown over the last couple of weeks, it doesn't, even in the areas where Ukraine had good defensive fortifications, they don't have the manpower to actually use them. And Russia continues to move forward. So literally everywhere you look across the line, and we could even go all the way down into the southern part of the Kherson Oblast. There's actually been a lot of activity right here on both sides of the line, actually beyond the line for the Russians. They've been bombing more areas here. And we're going to talk about this area right over here by Moldova and the Transnistria. That's going to potentially come into play here in a second. But first of all, let me run back to where we were. And so that's the issue on the tactical situation, with trying to figure out what Trump's going to do. So, and this is just to continue on from the last time you were on the show here. Russia has continued to methodically move across. Everything is in their favor. The manpower, the defense industrial base, their air power continues, their air defense, all those things that they have had continue, and actually in some categories are expanded beyond what they were before, and everything is shrinking on the Ukraine side. They can't mobilize enough people. The people they get are unqualified. They've had a lot of tactical errors in how they've been employing their troops, and the morale is literally going through the ceiling or the floor as they're trying to fight a clearly unwinnable fight. And then on top of all that, here comes Donald Trump, absolutely saying he's going to find a negotiated settlement. So the question is even more so for the Ukraine side: what are they fighting for? Now then, here we get to what is Trump's objective going to be. In his hearing a couple of days ago for Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he was asked, what is the administration's plan going to be? Here's what he said.
The problem that Ukraine is facing is not that they're running out of money, it's that they're running out of Ukrainians. There's a size differential here that's important. Now, what Vladimir Putin has done is unacceptable. There's no doubt about it, but this war has to end. And I think it should be the official policy of the United States that we want to see it end. Now, what that master plan looks like it's going to be hard work. This is not going to be an easy endeavor, but it's going to require bold diplomacy. And my hope is that it could begin with some ceasefire. And in order to achieve objectives like the one that needs to occur in Ukraine, it is important for everyone to be realistic. There will have to be concessions made by the Russian Federation, but also by the Ukrainians, and the United States has lent itself there. It's also important that there be some balance on both sides. In essence, it will be difficult to achieve this objective of a ceasefire and ultimately a peace settlement unless both sides have leverage.
Okay, now there's a couple of things in there I want to zero in on. We'll take them in order that he said them. First was, he said, well, I think the first thing is there will need to be some sort of a ceasefire and a pause in the fighting so that we can do some negotiations. Sergei Lavrov a week or so ago said, "Niet, no ceasefire, no pause, no tactical anything. We are looking for a solution to the war, or we're going to keep on fighting." So what do you think is going to happen, first of all, if Trump comes in and says we want a ceasefire, and that's one of his initial negotiating positions, and the Russians just say no?
Well, they're not going to get a ceasefire. The Russians would be nuts to agree to a ceasefire. They're on a roll. Why would they agree to a ceasefire, which would give the Ukrainians and the West a time to reconstitute the forces and get ready to fight against the Russians in much better shape than they are now? So there's not going to be a ceasefire. I think there are two ways this can play out. One is that the Trump administration agrees to Putin's demands and you get an agreement, you get a peace agreement. And the two main demands here are, number one, that NATO, that Ukraine never becomes a part of NATO, that Ukraine is a neutral state. That's demand number one. And demand number two is that the West recognizes that the 4 oblasts that Russia has annexed and Crimea are now Russian territory and will be Russian territory forever. Putin has made it clear that those two conditions have to be accepted to get a peace agreement. I find it hard to believe that Trump would accept those two terms. And if he did, that he could get support for that agreement in Ukraine and in the West, especially in the United States. So I don't think you're going to get a peace agreement. The alternative is that the war will go on, and at some point, the Ukrainians will collapse, and you'll end up with a frozen conflict. And this will be a disaster for Trump because it will look like he lost the war. Joe Biden has done a brilliant job of kicking the can down the road so that when Ukraine finally collapses, the Ukrainian army finally collapses, Trump will be blamed, not Biden, who should be blamed. But these are the two choices Trump has. Either he agrees to Putin's terms and you get a real peace agreement, or the war goes on, Ukraine loses, the West loses,
Go win either way.
and Trump is in real political trouble as a result.
We had Doug McGregor on here yesterday, and we were asking him what his advice would be to Trump if he could give it, and he says that he should literally not care what anybody says in Kiev or elsewhere, and says, or his detractors here, because he also mentioned that same thing about what the Biden administration had clearly set up to try to blame Trump for what happens next. And he said that he thinks Trump should just say, okay, it's going to be those 4 oblasts. And I tell you what, we're going to stop all of our support. We're going to withdraw all of our military personnel and anybody else from Ukraine until you guys make a negotiated settlement on whatever terms you can get, whether they agree to or not. Because if Trump were to do that and to cut off the supplies, even according to what Zelensky said about 2 months ago, oh yeah, we wouldn't last 2 weeks. The war would be over pretty quick, which is ironically what Putin said about a year ago. Now that would be a really hard thing to do, and it would cause a lot of angst. But do you think that realistically speaking, that might be preferable to what would happen if the fighting continues from the Western perspective?
It would absolutely be preferable. It would be preferable from Ukraine's point of view. Ukraine has no interest, as you and I have argued on numerous occasions, in seeing this war continue. And I think what they ought to do is accept Putin's terms, in large part because they have no choice. They're losing on the battlefield.
They better.
And continuing the war is worse than settling it now. The problem is that it's politically difficult, if not impossible, for Trump to do this. I mean, I think Doug is right in what Trump should do. Cut the deal now. But actually doing that's another matter.
Well, it certainly is. But that's why they're paying the big bucks, as they say, that as to be president of the United States. And I was actually on Tucker Carlson's show a couple of days ago, recorded rather. They hadn't actually aired it yet. But one of the things that he said, it really stuck with me that Tucker suggested was when we were again talking about this issue of how things would be perceived. He said, I think Trump should just say, I don't care what anybody says, because I know that his political opponents are not going to like him. So he should just do what makes sense for his people and the people that voted for him. In large part, one of the big reasons was because he was going to bring this to an end. He said those people would be happy, and the other ones are never going to be happy anyway. So I truly hope that Trump takes that course of action.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. But my only point is it will not be easy to do.
I think it would be enormously difficult. But to your point about what happens if he does it, if he's not willing to do the hard leadership stuff and take the heat that for sure will come from a number of different quarters, not the least of which would be from some European capitals. I think you can probably add a few into there as well. But also, if he doesn't, forget about the heat that he could get externally. What may happen on the ground could be problematic. There was a little remarked upon in the West comment out of basically kind of a quasi-national security advisor for Putin, one of his senior aides. He's on the National Security Council. I think he's roughly equivalent to Jake Sullivan. He came out and said that as far as Russia is concerned here, there will be no deal done until all the tasks of what they call the special military operation are accomplished. And one of the things he said, a couple of things that were really noteworthy to me. He said, we are particularly concerned that the violent coercion of the neo-Nazi ideology, along with the ardent Russophobia, are destroying Ukraine's once prosperous cities, including Kharkiv, Odessa, Nikolaev, and Dnipropetrovsk. We call it Dnipro in the west here. It is not excluded that in the coming year, Ukraine will cease to exist at all. Now, that the selection of those cities is noteworthy. I'm gonna go back to the map here again, because I want to point out where those cities are, and also in light of something else that's happening here of late, and that is to do with Moldova. Now, he specifically pointed out Kharkiv, which is up here in the north, Dnipro, which is here, Mykolaiv, which is down here, and then Odessa, which is down here. You see, all these are in this arc right here, which, by the way, this is the Dnieper River, which is coming down through here. And a lot of people have been concerned, actually from before this war, that eventually Russia would push all the way to the Dnieper River. Now, these are all well behind the lines here. And when he says that Ukraine could cease to exist as a state, that implies, and certainly there's been other information both from Sergei Lavrov as well as Putin in recent comments, that if they don't agree to the what we call the 14 June line, which is what Putin said in June 14th of last year, where all the 4 oblasts will have to come back to their control. And these gray areas that we're showing here are areas Ukraine controls that would have to be surrendered to the Russian side, or they say they won't reach an agreement. Now, there is a lot of evidence, in my view, and this is what I'd like to ask you, that Putin almost put these lines out there because, on the one hand, they seem kind of reasonable, but also it would be incredibly difficult politically for Trump to agree to that, to just hand over territory that they haven't lost. But that Putin actually hopes that's the case, because he'll just, even if it takes another 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, they will eventually continue until they capture all of this territory. And these Kharkiv and Odessa especially are, by many Russian viewpoint, are Russian cities, and that's something that they actually want. How do you see that playing out, and what do you make of his comments?
Well, I've argued for a long time, Danny, and I mean a long time, that the Russians are likely to take those oblasts that are to the west of the 4 oblasts that they have annexed.
You know, I remember, by the way, one of the first times we had you on our channel, you said you thought they would take 8 oblasts, not just the 4 that they did. I remember that.
Yeah, and it may even be 9 or 10. It remains to be seen. They may not, but I think it is likely, I'm choosing my words carefully here, that they will take additional territory. You want to remember that as long as NATO continues to insist that Ukraine will be brought into the alliance, the Russians have great incentives to take more territory rather than less. They have a deep-seated interest in turning Ukraine into a genuinely dysfunctional rump state. And doing that is facilitated by taking more territory than they now control. And this is why you and I have argued for a long time, some sort of agreement should be reached now before the Russians take any more territory or have an incentive to take more territory. But nobody, of course, has listened to that. And we continue to talk about bringing Ukraine into NATO. And that gives Russia a very powerful incentive to take more territory. And I think that is the direction that you're headed in.
One other thing that might be a kind of in a near-term triggering mechanism, perhaps. I mentioned the Moldova there, and I showed where that was in Transnistria. I mentioned earlier on the map. There has been an issue that was ironically precipitated by Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, when after all this 2 3/4 years, basically, where they were allowing transit of Russian gas to go to some elements in Europe, they actually decided to shut that off on January 1st. So they decided not to renew that, so the gas cut off. One of the biggest problems with that cause is that Moldova was getting its energy supports from there. Moldova is conversely providing electricity and stuff to the Transnistria area. And so now then they're operating at the moment on coal reserves, et cetera, because they had those. But apparently they only had about 6 weeks total of that. And somewhere around the first half of the month of February, that's going to be cut off. And so there won't be any gas. In fact, the Russian media is reporting, as you see in this report here, is that the gas crisis in the Republic of Moldova and PMR region, I think that's what they call the Transnistria, began after Kiev refused the Russian transit after January 1st. Since January 3rd, rolling blackouts have begun in the PMR, and there is no heating, hot water in apartment buildings while the air temperatures outside is below zero. Now, there is some concern, and let me run one more time back to my map here, that could be used. In fact, one of the thoughts is that Russia may be wanting to use this as a pretext to say, hey, we have all this territory is in between us and here. All of our Russian people are in this strip here called the Transnistria, and they may try to force a crossing across the Dnieper River down here, move across to, quote, relieve the pressure on their people here, which of course would then cut off Odessa. And now you have some real problems with that. And once you start moving down here, then all kinds of things become possible. If the Russians are able, and that's a big question mark, to break through the Ukrainian defenses in this part, then the whole thing could come unhinged, and the whole nature of the war could change pretty quick if that's to happen. What concerns do you have that the Russians may be thinking about doing something like this once the electricity runs out here in about 4 weeks?
I'd be surprised if the Russians did that. I think at this point in time, the Russians are concentrating on winning the war along the Eastern Front, as you described it before. And I think if they do take Odessa, they want to take it from the east. It is possible that somewhere down the road, they may use those troops in Transnistria to help them accomplish that goal. But I think that that is unlikely and not of great importance. The key question is whether or not the Ukrainian forces in the east will collapse, and that will allow the Russian army to move westward with relative ease. That's the key issue here. You know, when you were outlining the state of the war before and giving that excellent description of what's happening in terms of territorial conquest along the front lines, I was saying to myself, that's one dimension to the issue. The other dimension to the issue is the fact that the Ukrainians are suffering enormous casualties. I think much greater casualties than the Russians are suffering, in large part because of the imbalance in air power, artillery, and drones. And I think at some point, the Ukrainian army is going to collapse. You can see evidence that the wheels are coming off. And I think that once that happens, once the Ukrainian army begins to unravel, the Russians will be in a position to move eastward. I think they know that, and that's what they're concentrating on. I think Putin has been very smart is keeping his eye on the ball, not getting distracted, not worrying about what's happening in Syria, focusing on what's happening in Ukraine. And I think that they're looking for an opportunity once the Ukrainian army begins to really seriously fall apart to exploit that opportunity and move into places like Odessa and Kharkiv.
Yeah, it would certainly be a lot easier and a lot less costly than if they'd tried a forced operation. So we'll have to see what that can happen, because I've long feared that the Ukraine army could just collapse at some point, and we just don't know when that may or may not even happen. One last question before we shift to a different topic. Given all of these realities we just talked about on the Russia-Ukraine war and the imbalance of the power on the two sides, what do you think Trump will try to do when he comes into force here? I mean, when he comes into office on next Monday, do you think that he will try to reach some kind of an agreement, or do you think that he'll just try to say, hey, we're going to go for something big to make us look good, but knowing presumably that it's not going to succeed and just kind of letting this take on a life of its own? How do you see that playing out?
Well, what can he do to make us look good? Joe Biden would have done that if that was a serious option. It's not a serious option. Trump can't up the ante militarily against Russia because we just don't have the weaponry that we can give to the Ukrainians to make a meaningful difference in this conflict. If that weaponry existed, if there was some sort of magic formula, Joe Biden would have discovered it. Trump has no choice but to negotiate. And as we were saying before, the $64,000 question is whether he can get a deal. You know, they're talking about, let's have a ceasefire. This is a non-starter, as you pointed out. And then you come back to the question of whether or not they're going to agree to the terms that Putin has put on the table. And maybe they will, but I think it's unlikely that they will. And that means that the war will go on. All of this is a way of saying Trump is screwed. It's very.
Okay, well, that's one way. That's a simple way to put it. But what? So, how do you see? How could this play out? Because you have Kellogg. General Kellogg has been designated as Trump's emissary for the Russia-Ukraine war, and he said on Fox News a week or so ago, he wants Trump is going to come in and negotiate an equitable outcome. You saw Secretary of State designate Rubio there say, yes, and we want something, but where there's leverage on both sides, and both sides have to give. Maybe in a perfect world that would be the case, but it's not a perfect world. It's the real world, and there's not. So what is going to physically happen if Trump's team tries to apply these kinds of things? I mean, what's going to happen on the ground?
Well, the Trump team, when you listen to them talk, as you just described it, and you saw this with Rubio with his constant use of the term balance, believes that, we have leverage, the Russians have leverage, therefore there's bargaining space, we're going to work out a deal and live happily ever after. I'm sorry, this is not the reality that we're facing. The fact is the Russians hold almost all the cards. They're winning, and we have no way of rectifying the situation. They're in the driver's seat. They're driving a hard bargain. And again, because they believe they're facing an existential threat, they're not screwing around in Ukraine. They want to get a deal that secures their prospects for survival over the long term. So they're going to play hardball, and Trump is going to have to make serious concessions because of the imbalance of power that exists with regard to this particular war. And the question again, is he willing to make those concessions?
So let me ask you a hard question here before I shift to a different topic. What do you think, and we'll just keep it narrow, what do you think the first 30 days after Trump's in office, what do you think is going to happen based on what his people have said they're going to try to do and what the Russians have said they're going to do? How do you think it's going to play out in just the first 30 days?
Well, I think in the first 30 days, they're going to have extensive conversations with the Russians. And they're going to find out, they've probably already got some very strong hints, but they're going to find out for certain that the Russians are deadly serious. They're going to find out what the Russian demands are, and they're going to find out that if they don't meet those Russian demands almost completely, that the war is going to go on. And they surely understand that if the war goes on, that the Ukrainians will lose, and that this is not only not in the United States' interest, it's not in Donald Trump's political interest.
Yeah, I certainly hope that he comes to that conclusion pretty quickly, because it's going to be really, really difficult for him from a number of standpoints, no matter how this works out. We'll just have to wait and see how it actually does play out.
Danny, as I've said on a number of occasions, Biden has presented Trump with a bed of nails in Ukraine.
And that's about the most polite way that you can put it. I actually just published a piece in the publication 1945 yesterday that laid out actually more than 3 years, going all the way back to 2014, the terrible decisions that the United States have made, which any one of which could have had an off-ramp and could have prevented the war or brought it to a quick conclusion that would have been eminently better than anything that's going to happen now. And we've paid for a lot of that with the Ukraine side has paid more for it than they're going to. But still, speaking of Trump and whatever's next, let's change the topic here a little bit, and that is with China. Trump kind of had a surprising comment on his Truth Social here, where he said he spoke with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday. That's earlier today, and in his Truth Social space platform, he said, I just spoke to Chairman Xi Jinping of China. The call was a very good one for both China and the USA. It is my expectation that we will solve many problems together. And starting immediately, Trump wrote, we discussed the balancing trade, fentanyl, TikTok, and many other subjects. President Xi and I will do everything possible to make the world more peaceful and safe. Now, I'm all for that as opposed to being, antagonistic or so. But what do you make on this based on the difficult relations that the two had in Trump's first term? And where do you think this is going to go?
You want to remember, in Trump's term, there's no Ukraine war, and there were no wars in the Middle East. And therefore, he could concentrate on China and he could play hardball with the Chinese. Now, Trump is facing a huge set of problems in the Middle East. He's facing a war in Ukraine. And given those two sets of problems, the last thing he wants is trouble in East Asia. And therefore, he's being very nice to the Chinese. This is hardly surprising. He's pinned down in the Middle East, he's pinned down in Ukraine, and he's got to do everything he can to make sure that trouble doesn't start in East Asia.
And how much is, I can only assume that China would be eager to take advantage of those realities you talked about there. But what will this do, in your view, to bilateral relations between China and the United States? And is there a prospect that things can actually improve, that whether it's financially, economically, with some of the trade deals or so, or certainly in the national security advantage area, because, there's still that Taiwan thing hanging out there. How do you see that evolving?
Well, one could argue, given my rhetoric about all the trouble the United States is in with these two other regions, that this is a window of opportunity for China, and they should jump through it. But the problem that Xi faces is he has significant economic and political problems on the home front. And the last thing he wants is a major crisis or a war with the United States. Furthermore, if you look at Taiwan, I think militarily, this is not the time to even think, if you're Xi Jinping, about conquering Taiwan. The balance of power is against you. It's not going to work. So I think that both Xi Jinping and Trump both have an interest in doing everything they can to dampen down tensions between the two countries. So I would expect, one can never be 100% certain in international politics, but I would expect that you won't have much trouble between the two countries in East Asia anytime soon.
Well, that would certainly be good news, because that's the last thing we need, is to have any tensions going on that part of the world, on top of all the other fires that are burning around as well. I just wonder, though, because there's obviously still a lot of China hawks out there, and that would love to push him into a confrontational relationship with Xi Jinping, and they're probably gnashing their teeth at his nice comments here. Kind of a bigger question: do you think that the time of the neocons has passed? Are they starting to wane in their influence? I mean, you've had Mike Pompeo was basically banished by Trump as soon as he won the election here. Nikki Haley, two of the bigger China hawks, now she's been sidelined and nobody even hardly pays attention to her. Is it premature to write them off, or how do you see that?
Well, I'm not sure I'm comfortable these days using the term neoconservative the way most people do. I think the bottom line is that the United States is a remarkably hawkish country. It's filled with warmongers, and this includes the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Both parties are infected with Russophobia. They loathe Vladimir Putin. They believe that military force is a wonderful instrument for solving all sorts of political problems around the world. They think the United States is an exceptional nation, and it has a right, a responsibility, and the capability to run the world. And this viewpoint transcends both parties. The fact is that Trump is actually something of an anomaly. He's very unusual. And he's surrounded by people who are super hawkish. I mean, you can call them neoconservatives, and I understand what you're doing, and it makes a certain sense. But Marco Rubio, Keith Kellogg, Pete Hegseth, these are all remarkably hawkish people, both in their views on the Middle East and on Ukraine, and of course China as well. So I think that the neoconservatives, that small group of people who we used to identify as neoconservatives, Paul Wolfowitz and people of that sort, they've receded into the background somewhat. Robert Kagan is something of an exception. But I think the neoconservatives, narrowly defined, have receded into the background a bit. But it doesn't really matter because the United States is just so hawkish.
So let me ask you one last question on the China issue before we shift to the last topic. If President Trump were watching this show right now and texted me and said, "Hey, ask Professor Mearsheimer this question here," what would you tell him that he ought to do? How should relations with China evolve in his term here in ways that would most benefit the United States?
Well, there are two dimensions to our containment strategy. Number one is the military dimension. Number two is the economic. And on the military dimension, I would tell him that he should treat our allies in East Asia, especially in Southeast Asia these days, much better than he did during his first term, and better than the Biden administration did. The purpose is of putting together a balancing coalition to contain China. And I would also tell him to go to great lengths to make sure that he doesn't do anything foolish that ends up starting a war with China. With regard to the economic dimension, I think that everybody in the United States agrees that there's a serious competition now in place between China and the United States to develop cutting edge technologies, AI, quantum computing, so forth and so on. And it is imperative that we win that competition, or at least not lose it. And I think that he should concentrate very heavily on that.
And what is the best way to win that competition? Since we're not talking about the military aim anymore, what can you do to position ourselves to win that competition? Is that something you do domestically to try to improve something, or do you try to do something to counter the other side? Well, how does that work?
Well, you do both. There's no question about that. You do everything you can to feed the American economy, to feed that part of the American economy that develops these sophisticated technologies. And at the same time, you do what you can to hinder Chinese growth in terms of the development of these sophisticated technologies. I'm not sure how much you can do to slow the Chinese down. But there are all sorts of things you can do to accelerate American development of these high-end technologies, and we should, take the necessary measures to do that. Very important to win this competition in developing high-end technologies, or at least to stay as far ahead as possible of the Chinese over the years ahead with regard to this matter. And again, that's the economic dimension, but there is an important military dimension as well.
And how do you see that one?
Well, there, as I said, what's ideal is to have a formidable containment policy. And to have a formidable containment policy, as I said, you want to make sure you have good relations with your allies and that you foster the development of tight relations between all of your alliance partners. And we've not done a very good job at that. And that was especially true in the first Trump administration. I might add, Danny, it would be very good if we could get out of the Middle East in large part and get out of Europe in large part and pivot fully to Asia so that we had in place a formidable deterrent. I want to make it clear, I'm not talking about, looking to pick a fight with China so that we can weaken China. I don't want to fight with China, but I want to make sure we contain China so that it does not dominate Asia the way we dominate the Western Hemisphere. And that requires pivoting to Asia, and that requires having smart alliance relations and also winning this war over cutting edge technologies.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with those, especially on significantly reducing our footprint in the Middle East and our not leverage, but the risks that we face there. So I'd love to see those come down, and obviously to diminish what we do in Europe and let the rich European nations handle much more of their security than they have, and lower our exposure there as well. Last one I want to shift to. We'll kind of stick here in the final port here in the Middle East, though. and that is on the most recent news breaking out that finally, at least nearly finally, Israel and Hamas have reached some kind of a ceasefire deal. Apparently, the Trump administration put some arm twisting on Netanyahu in the 11th hour. Finally got this turned around. I think they had a vote earlier today in the I guess the war cabinet for the Israeli side that they have approved that, and it's supposed to go into effect at 4 p.m. on Sunday. How do you see that situation evolving? Because for a long time, it looked like the Netanyahu and his government had no interest whatsoever in having a ceasefire. They just wanted to continue fighting. But now, all of a sudden, after whatever it is, about 15 months of war, they have changed their tune. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, I think there are two reasons. One is I think there's no question that Trump played hardball with the Israelis, because Trump does not want a war in Gaza when he takes office on Monday. Trump has insisted that this one be shut down by Sunday, so that when he is sworn in on January 20th, there's no war raging in Gaza. So pressure from Trump mattered. Furthermore, the Israelis are in real trouble in Gaza. And I'll talk more about the agreement in a minute. But Israel has not been doing well in Gaza. They're suffering significant casualties there, especially in northern Gaza. And at the same time, by almost all accounts in the Israeli media, Hamas has reconstituted itself, and it remains a formidable fighting force, all which is to say the Israelis have not been successful in Gaza. Moreover, as you know, their army is in real trouble. It's an army that's configured to fight short wars, not long wars. And they've been fighting a very long war in Gaza. And at the same time, that army is now deployed in southern Lebanon and in Syria. And it's beginning to wear at the seams. And the end result of all this is that there is pressure from inside Israel, especially from inside the Israeli military, to reach some sort of ceasefire in Gaza and put this war behind Israel.
And what is the, I guess, the objective, do you think, of the Israeli government? We'll kind of keep it at the government level, not look at the internal reports just yet, because there certainly has been, they wanted to say, we want to win an outright military victory. And I think you and I have been talking for many months, as far back as you've been coming on our show, that was always an unrealistic and maybe even unattainable military objective. Because what you just mentioned there has happened, was determined to happen, is destined to happen, that because of so many people, innocent people that have been killed in this wanton destruction of the Gaza Strip, that they would create probably more enemy than they destroyed, which is exactly what we observed in both Iraq and Afghanistan during my time on active duty, and now it's playing out that way. But what are they going to do now? Because you can get a ceasefire, you can get an end to this current iteration of the war, but you've done nothing to address the underlying conditions, and many of which were led to the 10-7 in the first place. Now you may even say it's on steroids, because you have a whole population that's living in tents for all practical purposes. Where can this go from here after the ceasefire?
Danny, if you read the ceasefire agreement, it is a case of the Israelis admitting defeat. It's not portrayed this way in the Western media. You would expect that, of course, but it's acknowledgement of defeat. The Israelis have agreed to pull all of their troops out of Gaza. The Israelis accept the fact that Hamas is still intact and will control parts, if not all, of Gaza. Furthermore, food will now be allowed into Gaza, as will fuel, water, and medicine. Furthermore, the Palestinians are free to return to their homes. Remember, a few weeks ago, we were talking about the Israelis cleansing northern Gaza and not allowing Palestinians to come back to the northern part of Gaza. That's all over with. The Gazans are now free to move about the area as they see fit, because the Israelis are leaving. Just think about it. The Israelis are leaving Gaza. Furthermore, they're leaving the Philadelphia corridor, which is the line of control between Egypt and Gaza that the Israelis said that they were going to hang on to for a really long time. It's quite amazing what is going on here. Yes, the Israelis are getting their hostages back, and I think that's a wonderful thing, to be honest. But many of those hostages are now dead. And furthermore, the Israelis have been forced to release huge numbers of Palestinian prisoners to get their hostages back. So I think what has happened here with this ceasefire is a disaster for Israel. Now, you might say, John, this ceasefire is not going to hold. We'll see. We'll see how long it holds. But even if it doesn't hold, what are the Israelis going to do? They're then going to turn around and win the war in Gaza? No, they're not, because they haven't won it up to now. And that's the reason, that's part of the reason they agreed to sign the ceasefire. The fact is, they are in deep trouble.
Okay, yeah, and that's certainly the case there. And man, we could do a whole show on this, and I'd love to have you back as soon as we can to go into this in a lot more detail. But in the limited time we have left, look a little north of that. What is the situation for Israel in the current ceasefire situation with Hezbollah?
Well, that one is a real mess because the Israelis keep violating the ceasefire. And that's in large part because the Israelis are itching to destroy Hezbollah, and they understand that they have not destroyed Hezbollah. So we have a situation here where they have not destroyed Hamas. They now recognize that with this ceasefire agreement. They have not destroyed Hezbollah. They're in Syria. And yesterday, they, for the first time, attacked the military forces of the new regime in Syria. So the Israelis are overextended. Their army is worn out, and they have not defeated their principal adversaries. This is a terrible situation. So all this happy talk in the United States about how the Israelis have prevailed in all these conflicts and they're remaking the Middle East in their own image is just not serious. And by the way, go back to what we started with talking about Iran, right? You pointed out that the Russians and the Iranians are now moving even closer together, which complicates Israel's position vis-a-vis Iran.
And we didn't even talk about the Yemenis because they're also still not quelled. And wow, everywhere you look, all the fronts, the security environment for Israel is going to really, really be complicated for the foreseeable future. And if we had more time, we'd talk about even the internal contradictions within the Israeli government, which even makes it more difficult. But I guess we'll have to leave it there for the time being. But man, do I really appreciate you coming.
News stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. I have not done the original introduction in months. Why am I doing it now? I don't know. Thought I'd shake things up a bit for this one particular video. As most of you already know by now, my weekend content is different than my weekday content. On the weekends, I like to take a look at other content creators' videos and give my opinion on them, mainly people who are from TikTok. But before we do go ahead and get into that, I do have to ask, are the so-called powers that be, are they running some kind of psyop on us, some kind of mind game when it comes to the fires in California? So why do I ask that? I ask that because there was a big quote-unquote conspiracy theory, because everything is a conspiracy theory to them anyway, but there was a big quote-unquote conspiracy theory that only blue things survived the fires in Maui. People were putting two and two together. They were connecting the dots back to lasers, saying that certain frequencies could not affect the color blue. This is why, again, nothing blue was damaged in Maui. People were even pointing out that cars that were blue and homes with a blue roof were not damaged by the fires. This was a very big thing that was going around, to the point that news and media had to step in and release the fact checkers to let us know that anything blue that was unharmed in these fires was just a coincidence, because to a lot of people, the color blue was an indicator that we were not dealing with a normal fire in Maui. Flash forward to the fires in Los Angeles and tell me, why is news and media showing us multiple times blue items, specifically blue items that survived these fires? They know, like I said, that this is a very hot topic going back to the fires in Maui. So it's like they are mocking us.
So we found the house, and you walk up the front path to the steps, those blue ceramic bowls that are still there, but there's nothing else. The entire house seems to have collapsed in on itself. That, I presume, was the basement. This is what Lori will have to return to when she's finally allowed back home. And here in Southern California, things very likely could get even worse.
It's the photo that's become a symbol of hope amid LA's devastating wildfires. This Malibu neighborhood was just about entirely wiped out, yet amid the rubble, a lone bright blue Volkswagen van from the 1970s somehow remains virtually untouched. The van belongs to surfboard designer Megan Weintraub, who was surfing with friends in Malibu just before the fire laid waste to the county. Megan parked the 1977 VW Type 2 van on the side of the road, little realizing the horror that was about to hit. Look at the photo. Nearly everything is reduced to rubble, except for that disco-era van. And here is the van today, parked in the exact same spot where Megan left it when she heeded the order to evacuate. She can't come back for it yet because the neighborhood is still closed to the public. We spoke with Megan and her friend, Preston Martin, who was with Megan when they went surfing.
One of my neighbors sent me the photo, like, Megan, is that your blue bus? And I'm like, oh, I don't know how it survived. And it was like the light in the darkness of all this insanity.
To have a little glimmer of hope of this bright blue VW bus against the backdrop of charred houses it's sad and it's scary, but it's also beautiful.
Multiple news and media outlets, they are running the story of John Goodman's home being burned down in Los Angeles, and look at the photo they are all using. They are all using the exact same photo. One blue bin that has not been touched by the fires, perfectly put in frame of the camera. I feel like it was placed there directly after the fire for a photo op, once again, just to mock people who had this talking point from the Maui fires. There are multiple other news reports involving these fires in Los Angeles where blue items that were not damaged by these fires appear in front of the camera, again, like they're perfectly placed there for us to see them. They know how these fires started, the multiple reasons why these fires started, and now it's become a mind game. Now it's become mockery, showing us and telling us about these blue items. But talking about what's intentional and what's not intentional, take a look at this video by Grace Unfiltered on TikTok and let me know your thoughts about what's being built directly after these fires in Los Angeles.
I'm not saying this was intentional, and I'm not saying that they made this happen, but I'll let you decide. This is for informational purposes only. Have you actually looked at the blueprint on where they want to put the speed railway in California? It looks almost identical where the fires are. Coincidence? You be the judge. So we have two images here. Over here, this is the blueprint of where the railway system, that speed train, is supposed to go through the state of California. Okay, it passes through all those areas which are currently on fire. Over here, it's showing all of the affected areas that are currently burning or have been part of the mess that's been going on. It looks almost identical. I'm not saying that it was intentional, and I'm not saying that it was a plan. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that it looks very convenient.
For YouTube purposes only, I'm not saying this is why the fires were started, but if this is why the fires were started, then the smart city would be only one of many reasons, because again, we cannot take things like the tunnels and certain evidence off the table either. So we are looking at a two birds, one stone situation. In this next disturbing video, talking about tunnels, this individual, Derek Debbie from Kentucky, heard something pretty interesting coming from beneath the ground.
I have no idea what's going on, but listen to this. there's something under the ground, and it sounds like it's about to bust out. Holy crap. It's over here in the field. I've never heard nothing like it.
I have no idea what that sound could be, but it does sound like something is being operated from beneath the ground. Somebody also left a good comment by saying this is Kentucky. What he might be hearing is the New Madrid fault line, which would be very, very terrifying given the fact that the New Madrid fault line happens to be very, very active. But again, to me anyway, this sounds like some kind of machinery. This next video comes from the Paranormal Chick on TikTok, and this individual in Kansas notices a pretty similar situation.
I recently posted a video of mysterious underground tunneling that was captured in Kentucky. We'll take a look at this video. This is from Baja Western Wear out of Kansas on January 14th, 2025. She walked out of her barn and noticed something odd with her metal fencing. What appears to be vibrations running all along it. It was literally vibrating as if there was something happening underground causing the metal fence to vibrate. But the question is what is causing this? Is there something happening below our feet? Take a look at this video and tell me what you think.
More and more people are recording these booms being heard in the sky. Now, they do believe it's coming from the sky, but is it possible that these booms are originating from underground? These booms captured in this next video were captured in Tennessee. There are people in the comment section of this video saying this could possibly be connected to tunnels. This interesting news report came out of North Carolina on January 13th.
Wow, that was the sound heard across 2 different counties in our area last night. Dozens of people in Wayne and Johnston counties sounded off on social media, asking questions about the loud boom they say even shook their homes. WRAL's Heidi Kirk set out to find out the cause.
A sound that will make your heart drop. Only captured on this security camera footage in Johnston County shared with us. We drove east from Raleigh to find out what caused it.
Sounded to me like something fell.
Everyone has a theory, including Walter Vaughn, who lives in a quiet neighborhood in Goldsboro.
My granddaughter and daughter both said it shook their beds while they were, laying in them.
He tells us the sound was followed by sirens. He thought maybe a car wreck on the highway nearby.
And I could hear fire trucks, ambulances, just sirens, all coming on 581.
A coincidence? He's not sure.
Now, some people reached out to us and asked if this could be related to a small house fire that happened here in Wayne County last night. We reached out to Wayne County officials and they say that's not the case.
But they also didn't have an answer for us about what it was. Some of you asked, what about a sound from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base? We reached out to them too, asking about one other theory, that it could have been a sonic boom. In a statement, a spokesperson for the Air Force Base said that they did have training flights yesterday, but none of the aircraft generated the speeds necessary to create a loud boom. Others say, what about a gunshot, firework, or other type of explosion? So far, nothing points to those either. So for now, we'll keep asking those questions, the same ones that Vaughn has too.
Why doesn't anybody know about it or what happened?
Outside of these strange and unexplained noises being heard in the skies or below the ground, people are still witnessing strange sightings. In this next disturbing video, what happened to all the talk of drones and orbs? The news has become very silent on the topic, but like I said, people are still witnessing very strange sightings in the skies. This next video from Moon Henry on TikTok is pretty interesting because if you have not heard, SpaceX Ship 33 had exploded, and Moon Henry goes over this, but we have been hearing a lot of interesting news lately involving the number 33.
Am I the only person who's not really buying this story? Let me show you why. So let's start with the fact that it was Ship 33 that had the issue, apparently. Out of all ships, Ship 33. In every single angle of the video we have, we see it going with the horizon and not going up and down vertically. All the vertical tapes were people holding their camera the opposite way, like you can see right here. But what if I told you we've been seeing this exact type situation every month for a few months now? Like, for instance, this was the one that happened about 1 month ago, and they deemed it not a meteor shower, and it happened when all the crazy stuff was happening in the northeast United States, if you get what I'm talking about. Further, do you remember this type of stuff always popping up in the sky? Well, after Starlink came out, they claimed that every single one of these was just Starlink, even though it started happening way before Starlink. All over the place. Then we had people coming out saying, oh, there's whole fleets of interdimensional creatures on the way to Earth. So, I mean, is this really Ship 33 going straight with Horizon? Oh, it's so fast and gravity will stay up. I doubt it. Plus, keeping the same color the entire time without dimming out. And by the way, did you know that spiritual things make humans act funny? At the same exact time, a few cars drove off the bridge. A few cars off the bridge in Washington, D.C. Again, same time. Not to mention having a full moon 4 days in a row. Look at this from the launch. Do you think that this would make it into space? It's layered up with aluminum foil.
Now, I do believe there are a lot of strange sightings in the sky that just get tossed aside as just Starlink. And a lot of these sightings look vastly different than the next. And people just want to say, oh, it's just Starlink. Like Moon Henry states, many of these sightings we see in the skies go well before Starlink even existed. And what is up with the number 33? We know what group the number 33 is connected to, but it has been featured in a lot of news stories lately, a lot of strange news stories. Remember that story I covered a couple days ago where that HVAC worker walked into that apartment discovering guns, explosives, firefighter and police outfits, badges, and so forth, and that building just happened to be 533, 33rd building. Then a couple days ago, we had Hamas releasing exactly 33 hostages. Remember that other story of the Rothschild who passed away in that house fire, and it took exactly 33 minutes to put out the fire. The number 33 has been attached to so many strange and bizarre news stories lately, and again, we know who this number is attached to. This next video comes from the paranormal chick on TikTok, and you can see a very strange drone in the sky, and it's emitting a very strange noise. And this kind of plays into my previous segment with these mysterious booms in the skies. Is it very possible that these drones and orbs are making these booms?
The following video is from a man named Sean. His sister recorded this in Pennsylvania, and what it appears to be is a massive SUV-sized UFO or drone in the sky, but it's the sound that it's emitting. It almost makes you wonder, is this the cause of some of the sounds that we hear out in the sky? Some sound like trumpets, some sound like sonic booms and vibrations. Take a look at this and tell me what you think.
Oh my God. Oh my God, I can't believe this.
This next video comes from Glitter Beauties on TikTok, which actually shows a drone flipping as it's moving throughout the sky.
Hi guys, so I am going to show you an insane video today of something that happened last night. So it's insane to me. Last night I was walking my dog per usual, and I could see the planes, and I don't know if you guys noticed, but last night was a full moon. We had extremely clear, beautiful skies, at least in New Jersey. It was so clear, it was beautiful. So I'm walking my dog, and I could see, I think there was like 2 planes flying below the moon. They were just chugging along in a straight line, doing their normal blinking pattern. All of a sudden, I see one small object blinking extremely erratic. I have talked to you guys about these objects before. I believe that these are orbs. So I immediately go to grab my phone. The first thing that I noticed was that this object was extremely high up in the sky. It was way, way, way up above the moon, and it was so fast compared to the airplanes. So I start filming it. I could see that it was changing to all of these crazy colors: yellow, orange, red, electric blue, hot pink, lavender. It was insane. So I'm filming it. When I watched the footage back, it's when I realized that this thing, this orb or whatever it was, tumbles. It does a little flip forward twice. Tumbles. It literally tumbles in the sky. Okay, I'm gonna show you guys the video. You will see it. You're gonna see it go extremely fast, extremely high, way up above the moon, and then you're gonna see it take a little tumble and go down, and then it's going to follow that path down, and it's going to go behind a tree. So I'm going to show you guys that video first in real time, how it happened. Then the second time I am going to show you the video again, but I'm going to slow it down so that you can see it in slow motion. I am then going to show you the video a third time, and the third time I am going to go back and forth in the video to show you the things that I noticed that were just unexplainable. I am also going to show you a video of an airplane. For those of you that always say, oh, it's an airplane, and because the cell phone distorts the light, that's what you're seeing. Well, I have so many videos of airplanes, helicopters, and they have never looked like this on a cell phone, even with how crappy the iPhones are, even with the light distortions. You still can see their pattern when they blink, and you can see the light doesn't change color, and they definitely don't tumble down. So I am going to show you guys the video now. Let me know what you think. Okay, bye. Where'd it go? It's so high. I can't even see it. It's so fast. Gotta wait. There's a plane above me now, but that wasn't a plane that made no noise. And it was way up there above the moon. And there was 2 planes going under it. But that it was like up here, like all the way above the moon and going extremely fast. Where'd it go? It's so high. I can't even see it. It's so fast. Could have leaked. There's a plane above.
Guys, we got some insane footage coming out of Salt Lake City of a strange UAP that was seen moving around the sky in a weird way, eventually pausing, and they've got a telescope out, zoomed in with their iPhone 15 Pro attached to it, and they caught this. Look at this, right? Unbelievable. It almost resembles the strange phenomena that we saw a little while ago, but there's a giant discussion behind what this could possibly be. I'll put a link in the description below, right? Look at that. It's almost like you're looking at something through water. The way the distortion is. Apparently this thing kind of hovered around for a little while and then disappeared. Unbelievable. Beautiful coloration. I mean, there's a lot of theories going around between a lens distortion, between looking at a star through a telescope, and it kind of gives this strange warped effect. A lot of people saying this is Sirius. A lot of people saying this is an angel, a drone. But the description alone from OP that described this object moving prior and then kind of holding face, like we've seen with multiple UAP sightings, and then it eventually started moving again very slowly and then vanished. Kind of throws a few question marks up in my head. I don't know. You guys check the link out below, have a little read in the discussion, and kind of let me know your thoughts. But I thought this was incredible either way, and a very beautiful sighting. Unbelievable coloration.
That definitely does not look like any star that I've seen before, and at times it almost looks like a humanoid growing out legs and walking. And what's even more bizarre is the person said that it was not stationary, it was moving before it decided to stay still. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to
go follow me.